Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
It was the beginning of the afternoon when Tyrion was drinking at a window overlooking the harbor of Lannisport. The place seemed ordinary, with ships coming and going, and goods entering and leaving the port. He sipped his wine and continued reading his book. His uncle Kevin had spoken to them in the past few days about the situation occurring in the Reach, about his brother, which had left him quite shocked. Jaime, one of the last people he would imagine being kidnapped as a hostage, was now being held in custody by a group that had drawn attention from all the kingdoms in the recent moons from the north. He had always been interested in Jon Artika since he heard of him more than 7 or 8 years ago. He was quite skeptical of what he heard, about a boy of 8 named days killing a group of bandits with a bunch of farmers. But the stories didn't stop there, because he did a few more surreal things that year before disappearing into the north of the Wall. I heard how he came with an army of giants, and even small men like him, but saying they're not that size due to some birth disease, but because they're a different race from humans, and many would scoff at that if it weren't that. Their numbers exceed the thousands. 3 different races, men, dwarves, and giants. Tyrion murmured, still recalling how this had been his obsession over the years, researching everything about them, almost like he did with dragons to the point of asking for one for his birthday when he was a child. He tried to find out everything about giants and dwarves, even seeking books from the Citadel for gold, but the information was quite limited. There were some details about the giants, like how they lived with the first men before disappearing in the north after thousands of years following the construction of the wall. As for the dwarves, there were no records of them. It was as if they appeared out of nowhere. This intrigued Tyrion, who sought anything about them, and found nothing. Not even the maester of Casterly Rock or the information he requested from the Citadel had any answers or mention of the race. If Jon can make a new race come out of nowhere, could he not bring forth the children of the forest, or even dragons? That was the joke Tyrion had at the time, laughing at it without imagining how right he might be with that question. But Jon Snow was what intrigued Tyrion the most. A bastard who left the comfort of Winterfell to adventure in the world, and in the end, returns as a king after traveling to lands beyond what any sensible person in the 7 kingdoms would have. If it weren't for the trouble of that accusation of stealing his sister, Jon Artika might have been celebrated as a man who exceeded all expectations of his life and a hero among the common people. Tyrion had to admit he admired that Jon Snow and looked forward to seeing him as soon as Kevin spoke of the meeting with his father. Every day he was coming here, on a balcony, looking out to sea, waiting for the fleet of ships from the north to approach Lannisport. He was worried about his brother, of course, since he was the only one with such a strong blood tie who didn't treat him like a monster, unlike his father and sister. His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed ships coming to Lannisport, more than usual. How strange. I swore this ship was in Lannisport this morning. He murmured, looking at the flag he swore he had seen before. Are they fleeing back to the port? He finally realized, and it didn't take long for other ships to emerge from behind those merchant vessels, following them. There were 10 ships, and their flag quickly stood out as the symbol of Artika was emblazoned on the sails. Tyrion looked for a moment before jumping from his chair, dropping his book and wine. He ran through the corridors of the small castle where Kevin and his family lived, managing Lannisport for his family. He did this as fast as his small legs allowed, while the servants looked curiously at the urgency of Lord Tyrion Lannister. He quickly reached his uncle's solar, where he should have been organizing his things. He found the door open and immediately entered, seeing his uncle Kevin speaking with a Lannister knight. "Kevin," Tyrion called out quickly. Kevin shifted his gaze from the guard to look downward. "If you're talking about the ships coming to Lannisport, this knight has just informed me," Kevin commented to Tyrion. "You may leave us now," he requested of the knight, who exited the room, leaving only the nephew and uncle. "It seems they have finally arrived. Your brother will be here soon," Kevin said. "Do you think they harmed Jaime?" Tyrion asked, with the doubt still planted in his head, wondering if they could have done something to his brother during his captivity. I highly doubt it. He'll be fine, and soon we'll be sure of that. Now I will send a letter to your father, asking him to come immediately to Lannisport, Kevin spoke. And in the meantime, go to the port and wait for me. Also, organize everything that Jon Artika requested in the letter we discussed over the last few days to exchange for your brother, Kevin instructed, and Tyrion nodded and quickly left the place, assembling a group with a maester-at-arms and heading to the port with 30 Lannister men. As more Lannister soldiers gathered at the port, his father had already prepared a large group of soldiers for the negotiation with the Artikans. The merchant ships that had been at the forefront quickly moved to the edges of the port, while the others in the middle began to leave, not wanting to be near the Arcanian flags, with men shouting and running throughout the port. Tyrion saw this, wondering if the Artikans were so dangerous that the ships were fleeing in such a manner. They probably saw the fleet at sea and ran to take shelter in the port again, fearing being attacked on the high seas. Not that Tyrion could blame them. After all, no merchant would dare face so many ships, especially with stories of them ending up pirates in the east. Nonetheless, he stood waiting for the ship to approach while the crowd in Lannisport began to gather at the port to watch or even flee to shelter from any conflict that might occur. The first ships began to anchor in the middle of the port, while Tyrion saw for the first time the giants he had heard so much about. By the gods, they are real. How can anyone make armor for those things? While Tyrion was staring with his mouth open, the Lannister men behind them expressed their disbelief and fear, a common reaction when someone saw the giants. They were doing maintenance on the ship, stowing the sails, and even throwing a heavy anchor the size of a man into the sea to ensure the ship would not leave the port. It was a moment later that a well-dressed man, surrounded by other men in Elden metal armor, emerged with a group of soldiers from a gangway placed between the ship and the port. Tyrion stood in front of the Lannister soldiers, maintaining a dignified posture for the meeting while representing House Lannister. The man came out with other soldiers, but it was limited to just that. It seemed only a preliminary negotiation, as the Artican king was not among them from what Tyrion could tell. You must be Tyrion Lannister, son of Tywin, who is head of House Lannister, the man said as he approached. Tyrion was slightly surprised to be recognized. Not that it was very difficult. After all, he was the only dwarf of House Lannister, and the man must have done some research before coming here, but still somewhat honored by that. Yes, that's me, replied Tyrion, clearing his throat to begin. I am Tyrion Lannister. It's a pleasure to meet you, but I do not have the same privilege of knowing you, sir, he said, and asked with a curious tone. The man shook his head. I am no Sir Lord Tyrion. I am just a minister from Artika in service to my king, and we do not have knights in Artika. You may call me Darius. I am a minister of foreign relations with other kingdoms, and these are some of the 50 royal guards in service to the Artican king. He introduced himself along with his men. Tyrion raised an eyebrow at the number of royal guards, which was quite significant compared to Westeros. Well, anyway, I hope my brother is well, said Tyrion with a cautious look. The man nodded. Yes, you can be sure that your brother, Jaime Lannister, is fine. Although he got a bit roughed up during training on the ship, for men his size, you can rest assured that he is healthy, the man said. Tyrion, despite finding the idea of his brother being beaten by dwarves absurd, believed the man and breathed a sigh of relief. Anyway, I believe you are here to negotiate before Jon Artika comes, correct? He spoke. Exactly, Lord Tyrion. My king will come here as soon as everything is in order. The only demand we have is for all the metals we requested, and we also want to buy others, the man spoke. Tyrion nodded. All right, we will provide bread and salt to show our commitment to the negotiation. We have already prepared everything that was requested in the letter to my father, he said. Very well then. The man responded and stared at Tyrion calmly. Soon, a silence took over the place while Tyrion and his men looked at the Artikans, who also remained silent. Lannisters. Artikans. Tyrion frowned at this and decided to break the silence. Shouldn't you inform your king and send a ship or a raven? Tyrion asked curiously, but the man just smiled. That won't be necessary, Lord Tyrion. My king is already on his way here at this moment, he said mysteriously, as Tyrion raised an eyebrow. Out at sea, Jon was walking to board the ship where Jaime was. He left the main ship, keeping his wife on it so she wouldn't face any unnecessary danger, with his wolf taking care of her, while Arya would accompany Jon to Lannisport just for the negotiation. The ship sped alone towards the port, with 2 more following the king. "Do you miss home, Jaime Lannister?" asked the man at the prow of the ship. Jaime looked at him cautiously. Jaime had been quiet in recent days. He had heard about the attack in Old Town by the Artican men, where more than 90 ships left laden with loot. From what he could understand, they probably devastated the entire city, and he feared they would do the same to Lannisport. Jon sighed, seeing Jaime's worry. "You don't need to worry. I have nothing against Lannisport, unless they did something that would greatly annoy me. Then, yes, we would have a problem. But don't worry, the city is not in panic. Your brother is waiting at the port with your uncle joining him at this moment, and a letter is being sent to your father at Casterly Rock." Jon spoke calmly. This left Jaime more worried than calm. After all, how did Jon know everything that was happening on the other side of the horizon? Jaime was somewhat afraid of Jon and believed that he truly knew his secrets after seeing him control animals. He was a true master of whispers and much more dangerous than Varys could be. "You know, Sir Jaime," Jon continued, "I intercepted all the ravens with news from Old Town to the Western Kingdom. So, you don't need to worry about entering a war unless your father really wants one against me. And I wrote a letter to your king, but I also didn't speak about your children in King's Landing. I am someone who would not like to see children dying guiltlessly. So, I will preserve your children. However, this does not change the fact that your sister, who tried to act against my wife and even had that Kingsguard, Boros, provoke me in Highgarden, which didn't end well for him, and I suggest he retire after that. About your sister, I won't lie. If I ever go to King's Landing, you can be sure that I intend to avenge her. I have nothing against you and your children, but do nothing that forces me to act against you. Do we understand each other?" Jon spoke calmly, but with a serious and threatening look, almost as if Jaime was talking to his father for a moment, who nodded, although he would protect the woman he loves with nails and teeth, even if it meant dying for this Artican. But Jaime could not deny the fear he had of Jon, and wanted to be as far away from that person and his group as possible. Thus, Jon's ship, along with the other 10 in Lannisport, were among the few ships that still had empty storages, since most of the fleet was filled with animals and books in their holds, with their men taking care of them for the journey. Lannisport appeared shortly after, as they continued sailing at high speed with the open sea, heading for the port. He even had a view of the 2 groups at the port, while the Lannisters had at least about 2,000 men preparing for any fight, whereas only a few Articans were there facing them. Jon's ship finally stopped at the port. He proceeded alone off the ship with some guards, keeping Jaime and Arya on the ship before completing the non-aggression ritual of the 7 kingdoms. They joined their men while looking at the 2 representatives of House Lannister. "So you must be Tyrion Lannister and Kevan Lannister," Jon spoke, scrutinizing both Tyrion and Kevan. Tyrion seemed a bit nervous, while Kevan had a tougher look, despite a glint of uncertainty in his eyes, but maintaining a serious face as if he had control of the situation. "Are you the Artican king?" Kevan asked, scrutinizing Jon. Jon cracked a smile. "Yes, that's me. I've come to negotiate the son of Tywin Lannister, who is your relative, a Kingsguard who tried to attack us, or rather, kidnap me. But as you can see, it didn't quite work out for him," Jon said, as if it were a joke. The Artican men maintained a humorous expression, but the soldiers from Lannisport did not seem too pleased with that comment. Tyrion thought to act before the atmosphere could heat up. "King Artican, we have bread and salt for you, so that we can negotiate the well-being of my brother," he said. Jon nodded, approaching the tray that the maester accompanying Kevan offered. After taking a few steps, the man had no idea that the Citadel was in a precarious situation at this moment. Jon completed the non-aggression ritual of Westeros and looked to his man. "Call Arya. Let's negotiate," Jon said, and Kevan looked at Tyrion for a moment. "Can we see my brother? And I would like to wait for my father to come here," Tyrion asked. You can see your brother. Bring the prisoner." Jon nodded and asked his man as well, while turning back to Tyrion. "But as for waiting for your father, that's out of the question. I plan to leave today. I hope you have fulfilled your agreement, ready to load my ships," Jon said. Kevin, though seeming dissatisfied, nodded in the end. "Yes, we have prepared everything you asked for, and if you want to leave today, we have arranged everything." At that moment, another group of Artican guards arrived, while Jaime appeared among them, without handcuffs or anything that indicated he was a prisoner. He looked very well, while Arya also accompanied him. "It's been a while, Tyrion," Jaime said as he arrived, sounding more like a fun joke than a rescue situation. "You look very well, brother, or even better. Maybe being a hostage is doing you good." Tyrion joked while Jon raised an eyebrow at that, but soon sighed and looked at Kevin. Kevin quickly understood his gaze and called them to a tent there at the port while it was being set up. "Let's go, sister," Jon said, and Arya accompanied him as they sat on each side of tables set for them with the finest wine Lannisport could offer. "Well, gentlemen, besides the steel we asked for, we want to buy more, but I need pieces to be placed by the end of the day. Are you open to negotiations?" Jon suddenly asked. Kevin looked at Tyrion, who nodded in the end. "We have some things. Although it's a surprise what you asked to buy more," Kevin said. "Well, that's great." Jon looked at Arya. "You will negotiate," he said. Since Arya was learning about business on these trips, it was time to truly practice. Tyrion, Kevin, and even Jaime were surprised by this on the other side. Arya nodded and looked confidently at the group as a small discussion began. Arya, trying to come across as a shrewd trader, started discussing the prices of some Lannister storages that still held steel and metal, as the Artikans might ask for more and Tywin was willing to give more for his son. Jon, knowing this, decided to buy rather than being stingy after stating his price for Jaime Lannister's release. As they negotiated, Tyrion didn't know what to say, nor did Kevin, as both of them talked and discussed prices with an 11-year-old girl. Just as they were about to close the deal and Arya thought she had secured a good price, Jon suddenly spoke up beside her, not in the common tongue, but in ET. Arya looked at him in surprise, while the Lannister lords understood nothing. Arya asked something, and Jon replied in the same language from the east of Essos, starting a small argument between them. Tyrion was quite stunned as he looked at his uncle, shaking his head. He wondered if the maester understood what was being discussed, but the maester simply shook his head negatively. Jon hadn't chosen Valyrian because they might know something about it, so he chose a rarer language. After about 20 seconds of discussion, Arya nodded to Jon and returned to Tyrion, as they discussed the final prices again until reaching an agreement. Jon had seen that the girl was buying at a market disadvantage, so he assisted her as she was about to close. This was a small test for Arya, a proof of everything she had learned in the negotiations she had accompanied with Jon. After they finally settled the price, and Kevin ordered his men to start filling the holds with more iron and steel than agreed upon, Jon nodded in satisfaction as he asked to bring the gold, and now watched his ships being filled with the items he requested. As they waited, a Lannister guard ran out of the crowd and approached Kevin, handing him a message. Jon already knew what it was. Kevin listened and turned to him. "King Artican, my brother has just arrived in the city. He would like to meet with you before you depart, and is coming to the sea." "Very well, Lord Kevin. I would like to meet Lord Tywin Lannister as well." Jon spoke openly, as everyone awaited the meeting, with the ships still taking a few more hours to be filled as Lannister men placed the goods at the port, while the Artikans loaded them onto the ships. Jon was seated again in his chair as he awaited Lord Tywin's approach upon his arrival at the port, while his sons and brother waited with Jon in the tent where they had negotiated. The ships were finishing off loading the last shipments they had traded and purchased. Tywin approached with a few guards, while he had gestured for them to stop and proceed alone. "But my lord," the guard murmured, not wanting him to go forward. "My kin are right there. There is no need for you to fear for my life," Tywin said and moved forward, with only Jon and Arya in front of the other Lannisters. Jon noted how confident the man was in his gaze, as if he owned the place. Not that it was a lie, but Jon saw a man with the demeanor of a capable general. He certainly is, as the stories told, yet still, A man filled with atrocities to gain more power, Jon thought. After all, today he has his daughter as queen and grandchildren as heirs to the Iron Throne. He is the richest house in the Seven Kingdoms and the most feared as well. So, he couldn't help but admit that despite all the evil he had done, he still rose. He finally approached as everyone waited, but his first action was to look at his son who had disembarked with the Artikans. "How are you?" he asked. Jaime seemed to hold much respect for his father and nodded. "I'm fine. They treated me better than I thought," Jaime spoke. Tywin nodded and looked at his brother, Kevin, who nodded back at him. His gaze passed over Tyrion without bothering to look at him, as if his dwarf son was unworthy of his respect, or as if Tyrion held no importance to him. This was something both Jon and even Arya noticed, but kept those thoughts to themselves, while Tywin finally looked at them, passing by Arya and fixating firmly on Jon, analyzing him with deep eyes. Jon was not shaken by that look, merely staring back with equal intensity, almost flaunting a smile. This man wanted to intimidate him there. What is this man compared to the atrocities of the North? What is the look of a man who claims to be a lion to the fierce gaze of Aragon or even the cold stare of a White Walker? Jon was used to dealing with mystical creatures. This was just a man who holds political power in the Seven Kingdoms, perhaps even more than the king, but still just a man. You are the boy who ascended beyond the wall and is traveling through the kingdoms with your fleet, he said. You could say that, and you are the man who rules these lands, Jon replied calmly, as the place seemed to tense up with a heavy atmosphere. Tyrion looked at Jaime, raising an eyebrow, while the latter had a hesitant look, which made Tyrion wonder what Jaime had heard from the Artican for him to look that way when the same boy is standing up to his father. Kevin stayed silent while all the other soldiers and even common folk from Lannisport kept their gaze on that tent. Tywin finally seemed to slightly move his lips at this moment after staring at Jon for a few seconds. "Jon Artika, isn't it? I've heard a lot about you in recent moons," Tywin said, calmly approaching before sitting in the main chair opposite Jon. "I don't know if they're good or bad things," Jon said with a calm tone. "Many bad, I must say, which should not surprise you, but I've also heard good things. You have interesting products, closing large trade deals between Dorne and the Reach. I've heard you're an excellent negotiator, secured a spot for a port construction in Dorne, and gained land from Renly Baratheon, all in just a few moons, which is impressive. Especially for someone like you who started from the bottom." Tywin didn't intend to mock Jon about his bastardy. He was genuinely intrigued by this young man in front of him. Whether enemy who kidnapped his son or not, he had to acknowledge that in the opponent. "I try my best, though it was Renly Baratheon who sought that," Jon began. "He wanted a Valyrian steel sword. I can understand. It's a shame you only have one," Tywin said before looking towards the Artikans. "However, your unique metal is quite interesting. Are you also trading it?" he asked. "My Elden metal is not officially for sale, but I have certainly made some exceptions, with a recommendation for red wine and other nobles in the Reach," Jon spoke. "That's great, because I want to buy a sword from you," Tywin said. He might have asked for armor too, but knew it would take as long as it did for the nobles in the Reach, and he knew he wouldn't have the opportunity for that. "A sword? That doesn't seem to be a problem," Jon commented. "I'm willing to pay whatever it takes. You know my house, right?" he said. "Yes, I know that money isn't a problem for you." Jon nodded. "Then give me a price, but I wouldn't like to negotiate with a child," he said with a tone of demand. This man would never accept negotiating with Arya. It was an offense to who he was. He didn't even look at Arya, who didn't like that, but Jon said nothing, understanding his point of view. Jon sighed before speaking. 100,000 gold coins, and I'll deliver you an Elden metal sword. You're the first person to acquire this metal south of the neck," he said. After all, he had given it to his father years ago. "All right, Kevin, I want you to bring that money immediately," Tywin said as his brother nodded and left them. "I am also interested in your products. It's a pity you didn't bring them," Tywin said. "You know that our business isn't viable at this time," Jon said before looking at Jaime. The Artikans had kidnapped Tywin's eldest son. Doing business with the Artikans would be a disgrace for the Lannisters. Jon also knew that this man would do everything to disrupt business in the other kingdoms. Not that it mattered now. After all, Tywin still didn't know what happened in Old Town, because if he did, the conversation between them would be different. Our king was a bit hasty in deciding that my son could fight an entire fleet alone. Tywin spoke with a tone of disapproval, while Jaime seemed a bit embarrassed. I can't blame him for losing, but certainly your son knows how to fight. Jon spoke, and Jaime wasn't sure if Jon was really complimenting him or just mocking him. Tywin just nodded, and Kevin finally returned with the gold. Well, it seems that it is here. I believe our business is done here. Lord Tywin Lannister? Jon asked, beginning to stand up. We are done here, King Artican, Tywin said at the end, also standing up. In this box are 100,000 gold dragons, Kevin informed while his men brought in a crate. That's good. I'll have my men put on the ship. Let's start heading back north, Jon said, and the Lannisters nodded as Jon began to walk away without anything too formal. Arya followed him as they entered the main ship, with some of them beginning to raise the anchors. Jon kept his last look at the city, while finally the last load of iron entered their ships, commanding them to leave. Jon, Arya approached at this moment. Yes. Jon looked at the girl. Do you think they will attack us before we return to the fleet? Arya asked, as Jon smiled at her question. Maybe not here at the port, but yes. Tywin Lannister has prepared for us, so let's give him a good response. Jon spoke with a small smile. Meanwhile, in the largest structure in Lannisport, where Kevin lived with his family, Tywin drank a wine watching the ships disappearing on the horizon. That was quite quick, and you treated him so kindly. A voice emerged behind him as Tyrion appeared with another glass of drink. You are too foolish to understand. Tywin mocked and looked at his other son there also staring at the sea. Tell me, what have you learned about the Artikans? He asked, since he hadn't had the opportunity before, while he thought for a bit. They're quite an organized group, though they seem mostly a bunch of ruffians, especially those they call from the dwarf race, always shouting at each other all the time. Jaime began. Really? I didn't get a chance to meet any of them, but I heard they broke the nose of 3 Lannister guards just because they made a joke. Are they really that aggressive? Tyrion asked curiously. After all, he had to stay at the negotiation, and leaving wasn't an option. You have no idea. They can be more talkative than you. Jaime replied. Enough with those details. I want to know what interests me. Tywin quickly requested with a stern tone. If you want to know, they are an extremely powerful group. Their soldiers have armor that is lighter than common steel, much lighter and yet of higher quality. You can imagine what it's like to face such a group, while they get much less tired than an ordinary man. I fought against some and asked many of them, especially their royal guards who were on the ship. They are so strong that they could challenge the late Arthur Dayne. And there are 50 of them, Jaime said with a somber tone, while Kevin, who was in the room with Tyrion, raised their eyebrows at their brother's confession. Tywin was thoughtful while not speaking for a while. Then we need to get those armors. He finally said, I doubt you can. Their fleet is huge, Jaime said, doubting that any force in Westeros could handle that group. They are not in the fleet at this moment, Tywin said confidently, and Jaime immediately raised an eyebrow. Are you mad? Do you want Lannisport to have the same fate as Old Town? Jaime exploded. Westeros had made a mistake by letting that fleet sail along the coast without assembling any force. Now they can destroy and plunder any port. Even one of the main cities fell to this group. Tyrion was shocked, looking at his brother as if he had grown another head on his neck, while Kevin frowned, as Jaime yelled at his father and called him mad. Despite the surprise and anger he felt from his son, Tywin assessed the situation and decided to inquire before giving any sermon to Jaime. What happened in Old Town? He asked. You don't know. Jaime seemed shocked, looking from his father to his brother and uncle in the room. No, what happened in Old Town? Tyrion asked cautiously. Why am I surprised? I should have known about this. Jaime was never very intelligent, perhaps not as much as his father and brother, so he believed they had already received the news, but seemed to forget the fact that Jon Artika controls animals. Listen, of all the Artikans, Jon Artika is the most dangerous. He didn't just defeat me, as if he was dealing with a child, but the rumors that he can control animals. It's true. he admitted, leaving his relatives looking at each other, and Jaime continued. I saw him make all my men be thrown off by their own horses. He knocked down dozens of men in just a moment, Jaime said, as if recalling a horrific memory. That can't be true. Kevin spoke, totally skeptical. Listen, Old Town was plundered more than a week ago. Tell me how you don't know this? Jaime exclaimed. What? Plundered? You can't be serious. Tyrion exclaimed. Jaime saw even his father raise an eyebrow, moving from his stoic face to something a general who realized his enemy was outperforming on the battlefield would have. I don't know the details. I just heard on the ship while they were talking, but the Citadel along with the High Towers wanted to set up something for Jon Artika. This resulted in a massacre. I don't know who died, but I heard that important people were slaughtered by the Artican king himself. Jaime continued, speaking as the Lannisters seemed frozen listening to that. After the massacre, the city was invaded. I just saw more than 120 of the fleet's ships go into the city, hours later returning with ships loaded with gold and mainly books, which they stole from the Citadel. Jaime spoke and looked at his father. The proof that Jon Artika controls the animals is that he probably cut off all communication from the kingdom. Father, Jaime said. While Tyrion was still shocked to hear this, Kevin looked at his brother with a furrowed brow. Tywin seemed thoughtful as his gaze fell to the sea. Having sent 30 ships to approach the Artikans and bring Jon Artika and Arya Stark as his hostages for the rest of the troops. I think I made a mistake. Tywin commented. Kevin, I want you to gather all the soldiers you can from all the nearby men. We might suffer an attack soon. Take your family to Casterly Rock. It will be safer there. Tywin was quick and rational in any situation, so he had to deal with the consequences of a counterattack from the fleet if he failed, even though he already had 10,000 men in the city. However, Jaime's information was grim. He was frustrated, not imagining he could face someone like this in his life. Meanwhile, green fire was already burning in the middle of the sea, while debris was scattered all over the place. There were 30 ships, and 29 had been destroyed at this moment. Jon had long anticipated this while listening to all of Tywin's orders, and instead of letting the ships attack he himself launched the attack quickly and destroyed them, with the exception of one. Now, Jon was on the ship with the flag of one of the Lannister vassals, while looking forward on the deck with curiosity. There were bodies everywhere, killed by blades. Look at him! He looks like a rabid animal, shouted a dwarf, simply jumping back and dodging a huge sword. Hey, you idiot, do you want to die? It's still a blade. Another spoke mockingly while that dwarf took a risk against the only enemy man there. We're just dealing with a rabid animal. There's nothing to worry about, the same dwarf mocked while responding to his companion. Other men circled the deck, dodging the weapon, trying to hit them. This weapon continued hitting anyone there until an Elden metal sword struck against it, emitting a sound through the place. But I must say, this guy is very strong, spoke an Artican man, mockingly, as his opponent tried to force him back, but he still held firm despite not having an easy time facing that blade as he showed. Who's going to face him? Another man asked the group. Let me deal with him, spoke a dwarf with a hammer on his back. No. Jon's voice emerged as everyone looked at him. I will handle him myself, he said, drawing Darksister. Who stood there before him was none other than Tywin Lannister's hound, the Mountain, who had been sent with the 30 ships to deal with the Artikans. But it seems that the feared Gregor Clegane had been reduced to minor entertainment for his enemies. Jon looked at that creature who had committed atrocities by order of Tywin Lannister, such as murdering Rhaenys brother and even abusing her mother before killing her, something brutal. Jon thought about killing him quickly, but that would be too easy. So he wanted to handle the man while the men of Artika watched, a bit surprised, as their king emitted a glint of malice in his eyes approaching the enemy. The Mountain saw Jon and growled. As he moved towards him with his sword, he approached him running, and quickly moved forward, trying to cut Jon in half. Jon was quick to move his weapon, and despite his sword being a needle compared to the Mountain's sword, he struck against it, holding it while the metals clashed. Jon smiled at this and easily lifted it, while pushing Tywin's hound back, surprising him a bit. He again advanced against the Artican king, and a fight quickly began. while the mountain, in the next few minutes, started receiving cuts, with Jon easily piercing his armor with the Valyrian steel blade. At one moment, Jon kicked him after throwing his sword away, with the mountain falling on the ship's deck. He quickly tried to stand up, but then felt a severe pain in his lower body. Everyone was surprised when Jon simply plunged the sword between his legs, piercing the armor with blood spraying from that spot. The man began to scream, and Jon didn't care, continuing to drive his sword. "You like to rape, don't you? Let's see how you handle this for the rest of your life," Jon commented calmly, while not caring to see the man screaming almost like an animal, trying to pull his sword out of him. Satisfied with that, Jon withdrew the blood-soaked blade. He had just castrated the man, but he wasn't just satisfied with that, and he stabbed the sword into the ground as he looked at one of the men. "Give me a knife," he ordered sternly, prompting an Artican to quickly hand the blade to their king, who did not appear to be in a good mood. Jon took the weapon and approached the man still writhing in pain and went up to his head, removing his helmet with his own hands. Gregor Clegane, seeing this, tried to attack the boy he hated more than anything at that moment, lunging at Jon, who caught his hand. "You're trying to take my head? Think you can handle it?" Jon mocked as he moved the mountain's arms, before grabbing the other Elden metal sword at his waist and driving it through the armor into the arm muscle, pinning it to the wooden floor. The man tried to pull the sword out in desperation from the pain he was feeling, but received a punch from Jon in his face, breaking his nose and stunning the man for a moment. Jon took advantage of this moment, and all the Articans watched as their king began to forcibly open the man's mouth, taking the knife and making him scream as he ripped out his tongue, with blood spraying everywhere. "No dick and no tongue, that's how you're going to stay," and Jon mocked as he went back to the sword before twisting it in the man's arm, causing even more damage. Maybe with another arm amputated, Jon finished. It's very likely that Gregor Clegane never felt so much pain in his life. He even tried to scream, spraying blood, but only made a sound similar to an animal. The Articans were somewhat surprised by the aggressiveness of their king, but Jon just sighed and looked at them. "I want you to stop his bleeding, don't let him die, and get this ship back to Lannisport. I want Tywin to see his hound, that I can be even more cruel than the lion when I want to, and I don't need men to do it for me." "Are we not going to attack Lannisport, my king?" someone asked, and Jon shook his head. "We don't have time for that. We just dealt with a bunch of mosquitoes. There's no reason to destroy a city for that. So let's leave. After all, if I waste my time on every city that attacks me from here to Artika, it would take years to get back." Jon spoke, as he was well aware of the forces forming on the sea at that moment to face him. He didn't have time to deal with it at the moment. Perhaps in the future, as he had an impression that he would return here one day. Jon returned to his fleet with the 13 ships heading back to the open sea, while the fleet was stationed. "You finally came back." Serena went to greet her husband with Arya. "You got a good deal, I presume?" she asked. "You can say that Arya negotiated for the first time. Then I met the Lord of Casterly Rock, and we had some action on the way here." Jon spoke. "I met the dwarf known as the Imp," Arya exclaimed as she approached. "Dwarf? Do not offend us, little one. That is just a man with a height problem. True dwarves are us." A dwarf exclaimed upon hearing Arya, and seemed to take offense. Jon just sighed and returned to his men. "Anyway, prepare for us to return to Artika," Jon warned. The men nodded and began to move while organizing the fleet. "My king." An Artican scout approached. He had captured a seagull on the journey and took it as his bond animal while traveling miles from the fleet to navigate the sea. "Speak." Jon urged him to continue. "We spotted 10 ships to the north. They are Greyjoy flags, as you taught us. They saw us from a distance, but did not approach," he spoke, and Jon nodded. "So it seems the squids are curious about us. But let them be. We have no time for such things. Our goal is to pass through all the forces that Westeros will throw at us by sea. I see that they tried everything to stop us." Jon spoke. He had no time to destroy some squids. They had a long journey. "Of course, my king." The man nodded before Jon approached the captain. "Was there anything that happened while I was away?" he asked. "Well, nothing much, besides Eric comforting his distressed southern wife after learning we attacked Old Town." The man spoke, and Jon nodded. I can't blame her, but she will have a good life in Artika, so the South can be our enemy, Jon spoke in the end. Let's go inside, Jon asked his wife as he moved away from his men while she nodded. The Artican men quickly began working on the fleet as the ships began to align before starting to head south at this moment. The fleet soon began to disappear on the horizon. Meanwhile, in Lannisport, the only ship that survived the attack arrived with a single survivor, while Tywin approached with his family. "My lord," a Lannister guard greeted him while maintaining a cautious tone. "Tell me what happened. There are 30 ships at sea. Why do I only see one?" Tywin could not help but be a little worried. There are no other ships nearby. This was the only one that came back with a survivor, and the men are afraid to go see what happened so as not to be attacked. He spoke. "A survivor? Bring him here." Tywin spoke, waiting to find out what happened. But at that moment, the Lannister guard began to exit the ship while bringing a large man on a stretcher, covered in blood, screaming incomprehensibly in pain. He was tied up as he was brought close. "Is this the man?" Tyrion could not be more shocked. Jaime's eyes trembled towards his brother. "This thing is really him." Kevin also did not fail to comment. Tywin looked with furious eyes. The mountain groaned like an animal. His arm was still bleeding, and one could see the cut between his legs. He lost his tongue. His arm is not well, and he lost his balls. "Am I dreaming or something?" Tyrion murmured, as everyone in the port of Lannisport watched this strange and bizarre scene as they began to murmur. "He did it to warn us," Tywin murmured, and turned back to his men at that moment. "I want you to prepare for any attack coming from the sea. I need some ships on the sea to monitor the situation, and I don't care if they are scared, just do it." He gave his order in the end, as his men began to move, organizing for any retaliation from the fleet at sea. But unbeknownst to them, Jon no longer cared about Lannisport, heading south while he was in the middle of a pile of maps. His wife had just woken up at this moment, getting out of bed and looking curiously at her husband, stepping out of the body wrapped in her blanket. "You can't sleep?" Jon asked without looking at her. "I think you're the one losing track of time. There's already sunlight hitting the window," Serena murmured, noticing her husband hadn't even bothered to look away from whatever he was doing until she spoke. "It's true," Jon admitted, his gaze drifting to the sky above the ships. "What are you doing there, marking those maps?" Serena asked, surprised. "Well, you see, it will take moons to travel back to Artika, circling the entire continent again through the south and passing by the east side. I don't think we will be trading in these regions anymore. But certainly if we need to come back here, this route is very long, and I'm working on a project to shorten this journey," Jon explained, pointing to the side of the map. "You want to build a port to the west of the lands beyond the wall?" She couldn't help but comment, surprised by this. "Yes, I have many plans for the lands. First, we'll expand Artika. I want to take Hard home in the future and build a port city. It will filter the entry of foreign ships into the capital, but also have a port beyond the peaks of the First Men." Jon spoke, marking the 2 points. "That's clever, but don't you think access to the west is very bad, with a mountainous area?" she asked. "It is, but I have a plan. I had mapped the entire area as soon as we arrived there years ago. I found some interesting stretches," Jon said. "I see." Serena spoke while glancing at the headboard of the bed, where the dragon eggs lay as her husband liked to place them. The book still unopened by her husband rested there, but Serena said nothing. Days passed as they headed south of the continent. The shocking news of the sack of Old Town soon began to spread across all the houses on the continent. The news was very obvious. Jon Artika had initiated an attack on Old Town while massacring grain maesters, septons, and even the High Septon who was in Old Town. Jon Artika had gained a less appreciated fame than when the rumors of him taking his sister north of the wall appeared. Not that he cared, but people now feared the name Jon Artika more than ever, to the point of questioning whether they could offend him. He had already looted a city. What's not to say he wouldn't do it to others? The kingdoms began to receive summonses from the king, as many began to respond. Mainly the Reach. The nobles had gathered, and exclamations began at a meeting that happened even before Jon arrived in Lannisport. No one approved of the Artican attack. Lord Hightower was the most distressed. His city had been plundered, his brother now kidnapped. All his plan with the maesters had backfired. It was clear he was portraying himself as the victim. If he truly was a failed schemer of maesters and had lost much because of this, the Citadel might never recover. Jon didn't care about this fame he gained. He already had everything he wanted from Westeros, and now, with his storages full, could demonstrate to the entire continent what kind of realms they were messing with. Jon never planned to attack Westeros, but the Seven Kingdoms pushed him to the limit with their schemes. And now they were feared, and if they wanted to be enemies of Artika, well, Artika has no enemies. He spotted a fleet forming in the south as he was not approached until he finally passed the Sea of Old Town. The Red Wines, after all, summoned their ships, being one of the most powerful fleets in Westeros. By order of the king, Lord Redwine sent a letter and asked to attack the Artikans. What was a great mistake, because as soon as the fleet sighted 200 of their ships, but without Lord Redwine, after all the man had been in Highgarden still, without having time to return to his lands, Jon initiated an attack. The 200 confident ships soon began to explode like dust, even before they could get close. "My king, they are fleeing," his captain informed, while Jon watched the destruction at sea. "I didn't want to use all our wildfire here, but we have no choice. I don't want there to be any survivors to report on our tactics at sea," Jon said. After all, their stock of wildfire was running out fast with this enemy trying to stop them, but now it didn't matter. The ships continued to chase and quickly began to eliminate most of them, leaving the sea a graveyard. Jon had been cruel, but he had his people to protect and would not let any survivor or witness reach any city in Westeros. What should we do with the men fallen in the sea? His man came up to him. Jon thought for a moment. "I want you to gather all of them, put them to ship's prisons. We'll put them to forced labor in Artika," Jon decided. After all, this was an alternative to not just killing them while they were swimming, although he would have Sarum solve this problem if he were here. The men began fishing the men out of the high sea and putting them in holds. "Looks like Lord Redwine will have quite the news soon," Jon spoke in the end, as the fleet passed by 200 destroyed ships. He knew how this would drive that lord mad, as receiving a message stating that his entire fleet, the pride of his house, was turned into burnt wood, would make any man wonder if he was in a nightmare. "We will have to fight some battles manually. No more wildfire, but that does not intimidate us. After all, we are Artika, the strongest people in the world," Jon spoke to his men, as they responded by raising their weapons. Then they continued passing by, making any ship that spotted them run to the other side. They left the waters of the Reach and finally entered the region of the north, heading east. "Will they be sailing through our waters?" Edric Dane couldn't help but ask curiously. "Probably, but it's better not to mess with them." Illyria, his older sister, said while looking seriously at the son and heir of the house. "Would they launch an attack here?" He asked cautiously. "We don't know, but we must be alert. That's why I called the banners a week ago," she informed. Edric nodded in the end. "I heard that besides them looting the Citadel, about what Jon Artika did to the mountain, and about how they wiped out the entire Redwine fleet and left no one to tell what happened. It seems unbelievable. The maester told me there are some kind of demons that bring death and terror wherever they go," he commented. "Well, I can't disagree with him, but that doesn't matter. Let's just make sure they don't come here. The king is preparing another fleet in the Sea of Dragonstone, but I doubt the men will have the courage to face them after the news they heard about them here." Illyria spoke. Edric was silent after that, as another subject came to his mind. "So that's why I must leave tomorrow," he accused, seeing that his sister was sending him away out of fear of receiving an attack from the Artikans, who were instilling fear all along the coast of Westeros. "Yes and no. I'm doing this earlier for your safety. You are the heir of this house. My husband, Lord Bear Dondarrion, will take care of you. But I had already planned to do this before. You will take over Dawn one day, so I want you to develop your own skills," she spoke, and he nodded in the end. "All right, but one day might I be as good as the stories about my brother were told?" Edric asked about the brother he never met. "Arthur was a great swordsman. The older sister, Ashera, told me his stories, but I hardly had time to see him, as he was the strongest knight in the kingdom and was always going back and forth with Rhaegar. However, I believe you will be as good as him or better," she assured, trusting the boy as he nodded. leaving Starfall and heading to Sunspear. Doran was pensive about what he was reading in the letter he had received. He was quite bewildered about the events that kept coming, and the latest was about the total destruction of the Red Wine fleet. He did this. Naira's voice sounded as she read the letters. Yes, it seems he is much more dangerous than we imagined. He's causing chaos throughout all of Westeros, Doran had to admit. Naira was very confused about the latest battles. Ever since Jon left, she felt an emptiness in her heart and was keen to hear anything about the man she had discovered she deeply loved since he left, something strange for someone she had known for such a short time. The first news of Jon came when her uncle Doran had informed that his spy had been captured by Jon before winning a tournament in Hightower. The news didn't stop there, with one shock after another arriving weeks later. First, Naira was stunned by how Jon had made a massacre, eliminating all the men who controlled the Citadel and looting the place completely, stealing hundreds of thousands of books. She still remembers the letter from Sarella Sand, outlining all the horrors she felt while watching the Artican army killing soldiers in greater numbers, with Jon Artika, who she said was some kind of sorcerer, having set all the animals in the city to kill the enemy soldiers. It was a scene of horror, according to Sarella. He even dared to kidnap Tywin Lannister's son and sent a letter behind a bounty. The famous Tywin was at the mercy of a foreigner, and Naira took pleasure in hearing this. After all, she deeply hated him for what he did in King's Landing that night. She was happy that Jon made him deliver a large amount of iron to the Artikans. However, the next piece of news had shocked her in a way she had never been affected before, as the murder of her mother and brother had been tortured alive by Jon, mercilessly. Naira could not imagine that he could be so cruel, but the thought of the Mountain being castrated, having his tongue ripped out, and even having to lose his arm, which had to be amputated days later due to the injury Jon inflicted, had been shocking. Tywin could not keep this news a secret, and everyone in Westeros knew what happened to his hound, and it ended up being a joke. After all, Tywin had his son kidnapped, and still lost a vassal as soon as he tried to retaliate. Naira wanted to find Jon at this moment, but she couldn't. She couldn't leave Dorne because her uncle would never allow it, making her just clutch her belly hoping to meet him again one day. Doran was very impressed with what he saw in the letters. While he was in the room with his children and Naira, Oberyn had not yet returned, upset with his brother for having been practically expelled from Dorne. Today they had received news about Jon and his fleet eliminating the entire Red Wine fleet on the west side and coming this way. Once again, everyone was shocked by what they heard. Doran seemed quite thoughtful. I think we underestimated them, even more than I imagined. He murmured. I will send a ship to meet him, he said in the end. His cousin looked curiously at her father. Wait, what about the king's order that we should cut all ties with Artika? Arya commented. The king may have issued an order to cease any commercial ties with Artika, but we will not end our dealings with the kingdom beyond the north. It is too profitable, and he has given me a good reason to go against the king. We were waiting for a chance for revenge, and it seems to have started now. Doran spoke while everyone just nodded. Then he continued. I want to know all the news of the fleet and intend to invite them here for a meeting more important than the last. I would like to speak with Jon Artika, he said in a serious tone. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, the city filled with rumors about the elimination of the Red Wine fleet, with the Septons speaking about the death of the High Septon, leaving everyone frightened. Baelish was in his brothel, frowning, wondering if Stannis' ships would really be able to handle them, so he decided to talk to some of his contacts in Stepstone. He sat at his desk and began to write, before sending a letter south, issuing a bounty for some pirate groups to attack the Artican fleet when it passed through Stepstone again. Meanwhile, other ravens arrived in the north. Lord Stark was not having an easy time in recent weeks. The good news about his daughter, and the proposals had become water under the bridge as news of Jon launching an attack on Old Town and massacring people at the Citadel came in. What he had done to Clegane was not at all pleasant. He did not like the man at all, but what Jon did left him quite shocked. Then news had arrived about the elimination of the largest fleet in the Reach. His wife was quite disturbed, since the king had issued an order to attack the fleet, and she feared for Arya every day and even went back to offending Jon by saying he was a monster. I hope things get better, he murmured. He had not been called to attack Jon, due to the North having no fleet, but he did not know what he would do if ordered, but he certainly was not at all happy with Jon and his actions. The Artican fleet sailed across the southern sea of Westeros, reaching the southeastern tip before turning northward. It was then that a ship from Dorne intercepted them midway. What should we do with it? Jon heard his captain while watching the approaching ship. Let it come closer. Let's at least give a response to the Prince of Dorne. Jon said calmly, "All right, I will let the main ship meet them." The captain spoke as they waited for the ship to slowly approach. It didn't take long for the emissaries from Dorne to come aboard with a well-dressed man, one that Jon remembered well from meeting at the Sunspear Castle. He was always doing things for Doran. "King of Artika, it's good to see you again." He spoke with much respect, far more than he used to during his visit. "Tell me what your prince wants." Jon asked, arms crossed. "He would like to have you at the castle again as a special friend of Dorne, King of Artika." He spoke with the same respectful tone, though seeming surprised by Jon's arrogant tone. "You can tell Doran that we refuse. After all, I have more important matters." Jon spoke with an arrogant smile. "But, King of Artika," he tried to insist. "In Dorne, you called me Lord of Artika, or even Lord Artican. I don't understand your change when referring to me, but my answer is no," Jon said, dryly before taking something from his waist. "Anyway, here's a scroll for your prince. He'll understand when he opens it," Jon simply said as he tossed the scroll to the man, who quickly caught it. The man from Dorne quickly took the scroll while looking lost at Jon, who simply turned away and ordered his men to continue their journey north. Jon left the Dornish ship behind as he went to practice some fencing with Arya at the girl's request, finishing his training and then dining alone with his wife in the evening before warming some dragon eggs and working on his new project to the north beyond Artika. After all, the port in the west beyond the fist of the First Men was not just for commercial use, but also military, a good way to counter the south, especially now that Jon had a broken relationship with the Seven Kingdoms. Moreover, he had to prepare, as Artika was already facing a war with the White Walkers and their army. The south might be welcome too, but he had to be ready for that. Jon slept with Serena, and the next day, as the fleet continued passing through the waters of the Dornish capital with local ships keeping their distance, Jon wanted to see the only person who interested him in that place, and his little seagull traveled to the Martell castle. At the woman's window, Naira or Rhaenys sat calmly on her bed looking at a dragon book, which she always read to calm herself from something. "You would certainly freak out if you saw my new collection of dragon eggs, which will fill the entire space above Artika," Jon murmured internally and watched for a while longer before cutting the connection. He had no reason to stay, especially her. He would try to catch her as soon as he returned from Artika, while his next destination was the Jade Sea as he traveled through Essos. He got up for bed after that and went to the prison on this ship, where a single prisoner was held, who was the brother of Lord Hightower whom Jon had captured and brought to Artika. "You are here. Release me immediately. I demand it. I am a noble from a powerful house of Westeros. Listen to what I'm saying. I have many friends and contacts. Highgarden will not let a savage bastard do as he pleases." He yelled before Jon slapped him so hard that the man fell to the ground dazed and stunned. "Just shut up. I haven't visited you for nearly a moon," Jon began, letting the man recover a bit before continuing. "You don't seem to understand that it doesn't matter who you were when you were captured. But I must say, I intended to exchange you in a deal with your brother if he came to negotiate, but the only thing that appeared in the Sea of Highgarden was the Red Wine Fleet." Jon started as the man watched him cautiously. "If we are here, it means we've dealt with the entire fleet of Lord Redwine. I wanted to see your face of regret as soon as you heard the news about the destruction of the 200 ships. I believe you heard the explosions very well from here, but nobody told you what was happening," Jon said with a rather calm smile for this man's misfortune. "So Lord Hightower, after looting Old Town and destroying Highgarden's largest fleet, you don't seem as powerful as you appear," Jon said calmly. Lord Hightower didn't know how to respond, and if he did respond, he would receive another slap as strong as the last while he still struggled to remain conscious after that. "I'm not here to laugh at the efforts of your kingdom, but to warn about your fate. You tried to use schemes against Artika along with your brother, so you will come with us to our kingdom along with the red wine fleet we captured. We'll keep you working forcefully for some time. You could say we're making you slaves, even though Artika doesn't practice this. No one should take a man's freedom, but for criminals, we put them to help in the quarry. After all, just keeping them behind some cells doesn't seem like a good punishment. Jon spoke calmly. Wait, don't do this. I mean, you can't do this to me. King of Artika, I'm sure we can come to an agreement, and you can still leave without harming your relations with Westeros. He tried to kneel in front of Jon, even losing his pride at that moment. He didn't want to go to a place on the other side of the world, away from his family to break stones every day. Spare that energy for use in Artika, Lord Hightower. You're now an Artican prisoner. Moreover, this is the last time I will refer to you as Lord, so I wish you good luck. Jon finished as he left the man who still seemed insistent on trying to plead for his freedom. But Jon ignored him. At least he had a better fate than the septons and maesters who tried to put him against the wall. Jon was alone. He didn't like having royal guards in his shadow all the time. So he did some things alone and didn't see danger in dealing with a prisoner in his cell. He left the inside of the ship while someone immediately approached him. The man wore a cloak while chains clanked against each other as he walked. This was an archmaester who had boarded his ship after the sack of Old Town. Ironically enough, but the man, despite initial caution, stood firm in asking for Jon's help, and he had accepted, feeling no malice from the man against Artika. This was Archmaester Marwyn, the same man who had fallen in front of Jon while he was being escorted to the citadel, and warned him about the trap. The man approached him as he was heading to Hightower after finishing looting the citadel's vault and asked him to study the magic of Artika, with some conditions that Jon proposed to him. And as he accepted, he ended up traveling with them, so they talked a few times during the journey. Jon, not having time to start reading the secret books of the Citadel, ended up giving that task to the man to summarize them before he began reading them. King of Artika, I've just read some books, he said. That's good. We could talk a bit. Jon spoke while they were at the edge of the ship, Jon listening to his findings. I read some ancient books, but I was interested in the more recent records and really terrible things. Maester Pycelle was exchanging letters with the Citadel during the reign of the Mad King, and they talked about putting a substance in his medicines to make the man even madder. He spoke as if it were a scandal, not that it wasn't. These crazies, they probably contributed the most to Robert's rebellion happening. Jon growled at this information. The maesters themselves said they have their mouths in the ears of all the lords of Westeros, and that they could control the 7 kingdoms from behind scenes. Yes, I never had access to this information, so it is really dark to read it for the first time, but there was another important thing. He seemed about to release another scandal. I don't know the details, but some record from an archmaester of the time claimed that Lyanna Stark was not abducted by Rhaegar. He spoke as Jon immediately raised an eyebrow at this. What? He seemed very surprised by this as he opened his green and gray eyes. Yes, it seems that information was swapped for one that he had abducted her to rape her. It seems this happened at River Run, near the wedding of your uncle Brandon Stark with Catelyn Tully, when a scandal about the prince broke out and started the rebellion. He spoke, and Jon seemed quite surprised by this before turning back to the maester. Do you have any more information? Jon asked, but the maester shook his head at that. Sorry. The diary I read was quite limited, but I intend to find out more by reading other books. He spoke with an apologetic tone, and Jon nodded. All right, make yourself at home. I'm going to my room, Jon said as he headed inside the ship to his cabin. His wife was sitting drinking juice while eating grapes sitting on the bed. Her belly was quite large at this moment, and she displayed it while being alone in the room. Jon ended up spending the rest of the day with his wife. He kept vigilance in the north and other sides of the sea to see any danger of attack. But he didn't do this often. He was still recovering a bit after using his powers to control animals of an entire city, as he did with Old Town. He was fine, but knew he had to recover a bit more after controlling thousands of animals. So he limited his powers just to see surveillance, but sometimes looked to see something interesting happening in the 7 kingdoms, like some of his animals that were still in the Kinglands. In Dorne, the messenger man had finally returned to the seat of House Martell. So he just handed over a scroll. Doran raised an eyebrow, not thinking Jon would be so spiteful, but he just sighed, opening the letter. His children and niece looked at him, expecting him to read, but Doran just kept silent, reading the message from Jon to himself. Doran Martell, I will be frank, since leaving Highgarden, I no longer have patience for Westeros and its games. I have my trade agreements with you. But if you want to continue them, I will continue sending ships to the south. I hope you can receive them with our goods as agreed. I still want to buy sand from your deserts and make the port, so I hope you treat my men with respect as a business partner. However, this will end if you harm a single Artican who steps in Dorne. As I said, I know. Longer have patience with you from south of the wall, and I will act to defend my people. There are two things I am making clear to you as well. First is about your brother. Do not put him in front of me. Otherwise, I would kill him, and I do not care if our dealings end like this. I will do exactly that if I encounter him. So make sure he does not bump into us. The second point, your maester sent letters plotting a trap with the Citadel. He even tried to poison my wife, and I had warned before, also found out that he contacted pirates from Stepstone to attack my wife Ygritte. So, at this very moment as you read this letter, your maester is being killed by me. So, besides being trade partners, we are not friends. Artika has no friendship with Dorne, not after how you acted with us, and do not insist on this. King of Artika. Doran read the letter in silence, furrowing his brow as those present watched him curiously. It was at that moment that the door was knocked urgently. Doran, his face growing even darker, raised his voice. "Enter," he said, and the door swung open with a guard stepping in, his face filled with hesitation. "My lord, the maester, his throat has been cut. We don't know who did it. It could have been a faceless man." He spoke as they found the maester writhing in the library, not knowing who did it, theorizing it was a man from the Bravos Guild. But the perpetrator had escaped through the window, as a bird flew towards the sea at that moment, holding in its claw a blade tied to its leg, which Jon had trained to deliver a clean death when needed. Doran just listened to that without knowing how to proceed. He was backed into a corner, just when he thought he might have a powerful ally to fight against the Baratheons and the Lannisters. Meanwhile, the Artican fleet arrived in the Stepstone area in the next few days as it approached the first islands, but keeping to the open sea. "Shall we do this, my king?" the captain asked Jon. "Yes," Jon said as he called all the ravens from the ship captains to land in front of him. He had decided this last week, and it was time to pass on the new plan to them upon arriving in the region. Meanwhile, in a town on Bloodstone, one of the islands located in Stepstone to the north, this town was formed by pirates and outlaws. Its only activity was illicit business. Even a basic owned trade, like fishing, hunting, shipbuilding, they did not have, while only distribution of loot, slaves, and prostitution dominated the town. It was more of a refueling and entertainment base for pirates, a place that was even used to charge tolls from ships passing through the area when Stepstone had a dominion. On this day, the town seemed quite bustling as hundreds of pirate ships were docked, filling the entire harbor. In a tavern, men shouted at each other. While there was a dead body outside after a fight, the prostitutes and alcohol were the entertainment for these men. "So, we're going to attack the Artican fleet again. You know what happened to those ships that tried to attack 50 of theirs, and they'll do it again. Even after all the rumors," a pirate spoke in the tavern to his companion, keeping a woman with few of her teeth in her mouth while her breasts were exposed, and he caressed them. His companion listened and simply pushed the prostitute off his lap. "Get out of here," he said with a firm tone, as the woman left to not get involved in the conversation. And he continued, "Yes, a contact in Kingsland offered a lot of gold for us to at least wear them down, since the suspicion is that they use a trick of fire, known in the Seven Kingdoms as wildfire. So they want us to clear their stocks, since a large fleet awaits them in the waters off Kingsland, summoned by King Robert Baratheon himself." "But that's madness, isn't it suicide?" another questioned, wondering who would accept this. "Yes, it is suicide, for they will all die. However, some pirates are putting up some men to do it, since their contact offered full reimbursement of ships and a lot of gold. An irresistible offer, and it is being kept only by the captains. They haven't passed it on to any of their crew, so they're thinking of sacrificing them." The other spoke. Conversations like this continued to circle around the port city among the captains, especially as the days went by. They finally began to hear reports of ships, seeing the Artican fleet coming from the south. This gathered a large group of ships filled with pirates who would be decimated just to serve as cannon fodder and diminish the enemy's power. It was night at this moment, and the men were preparing to set out the following morning. "I still think this is madness," a man said to his pirate friend as he watched other men filling the ships. "Let's just follow them to a part of the sea and then leave them to be destroyed," the man, who was the captain, reassured. "If you think this is going to work, then I'll follow you," the friend commented, until, looking into the darkness of the night, he noticed something in the sea. "Wait, what is that?" he murmured. His captain beside him also looked and saw something strange emerging in the waters, but it was a dark night with poor visibility. So he took a small round glass and put it to his eye, which slightly extended the range of vision, until he took it off with eyes widened after looking for a while. "Why are they here?" he murmured in disbelief. "What are you seeing, man?" his companion asked. "It's them. The Artican fleet is coming this way," he murmured as more and more shadows began to emerge on the horizon, advancing at full speed towards the port city. Meanwhile, Jon was bathing in the glow of the night stars on the deck of the main ship, looking ahead as the ships sailed with no visible lanterns, just following the guidance of their owls in the air. Since Jon was planning a surprise attack, his plan was very straightforward. He knew of the force that was forming in the Sea of Kingsland. Thus, his new task was to dominate those who would attack him. He ordered all his ships to increase speed to catch them before they came to sea, catching them off guard. They would dominate the city and begin replenishing all the stocks of wildfire, starting production on land to later return to sea and destroy all the ships of Westeros that would try to bar their return to Artika. Jon kept all his plans with satisfied glee as the city came ever closer. Raven arrived at Red Keep just now as Varys picked it up and read the letter with quite surprised eyes, quickly noticing another Raven landing, and soon after, grabbing the second letter and becoming even more shocked by its contents. His first move was to leave the room, finding a Kingsguard as quickly as possible while a council was convened due to the information from Varys. A moment later, all the counselors except for the 3 members of House Baratheon were present. Renly, who was still assessing and resolving the damages caused by the Articano and the Reach, Stannis, who was at Dragonstone organizing the troops and ships, and Robert in his room, drunk. "Come on, Varys, tell us why this summons." "Any news from—" Jon Arryn spoke while the king was absent. "I have 2 pieces of news. The first from Dorne. Prince Doran tried to meet with Jon Artika," Varys began. "Those traitors, they're planning something," the queen immediately exclaimed. "Calm yourself, Cersei. We cannot accuse any great noble so outright without proof." Jon spoke and looked to Varys to continue. The eunuch sighed and continued. "Jon Artika refused, it seems, but not just that. The maester of House Martell was murdered by a man they suspect to be a faceless man," he said. "This is absurd. Is that savage trying to kill all the maesters in Westeros?" Pycelle complained, a bit scared. He wasn't the only one. After all, Cersei and Littlefinger frowned. They could be next after Jon's promise in his letter. "Why'd he do this?" Jon asked with a dark expression. He had no empathy for Jon Artika. In fact, he saw him as another mad king who must be killed. But this one was even worse because, in addition to his cruelty, he had power and strategy, while he knew very well what to think. Well, the maester might have tried to poison Jon Artika's wife while in Dorne, or even pass information to the Citadel and to pirates, as the fleet that went north before Jon arrived on the west side of the continent was attacked, Varys commented. "We are really in a bad situation." The Lord Commander decided to comment on the issues. First Old Town, then what he did in the Sea of Lannisport. The last thing we know is that he destroyed an entire fleet of the Red Wines. A terrible loss for the Reach, and for all of Westeros with that. Varys was also quite worried. He did not know Jon, but what he did was unimaginable, even in the history of Westeros. "They are heading north now, aren't they?" "Where are they?" Jon asked. Varys nodded, before picking up the second letter he received. "They are in Bloodstone," he announced. "How did he get there so quickly?" Littlefinger said with a very worried tone. Not only how they arrived, but they have taken over an entire pirate city and are using the place to arm themselves to fight against the fleet coming led by Prince Stannis, he said. Read the letter, Jon requested, and Varys nodded. To the eunuch who thinks he knows everything. Varys began, as everyone raised an eyebrow. Since this information will reach you one way or another, I might as well deliver it myself. We are here in Bloodstone. I've just conquered the city to which your master of coin sent a letter offering a large amount of gold for ships to attack us. But I decided to act first. After all, we may have destroyed 200 ships in the west, so we are preparing to destroy another fleet of Westeros. When I am in this war, I will hunt both Littlefinger and Cersei, so I hope you can survive my attacks in the dark. After all, I'm just giving you back what you tried to do to me and my people. Varys read, leaving the room completely silent. Can Ned's son be so dishonorable as to threaten to attack with assassins? Jon Arryn exclaimed, dissatisfied. He can't threaten me. I am the queen. Cersei immediately exclaimed. While her eyes were filled with considerable fear, she could not help but feel it with everything she had heard. Littlefinger also shared the queen's fear. He never imagined his life would be in so much danger, and hearing that Jon Artika might have a faceless man assassin was quite dangerous indeed. Honorable or not, with the money he has, he could very well do it. Varys gave his opinion. And he can control animals, as we have seen. You saw what he did with Ser Gregor Clegane. No one ever imagined he would do that to a man like that, he said. He's certainly scaring all the soldiers of Westeros with these stories. Varys Anselmi shared his opinion. Everyone was uneasy with each story about Jon Artika, and his story was spreading through Westeros like fire. This is terrible. Jon Arryn was increasingly gloomy. Tell me, Varys, what do the common people say about Jon Artika? Jon Artika, the bastard of Winterfell who became a king, king beyond the wall, king of the giants. These are the nicknames he received, and the stories began to emerge. A swordsman, they said, was the fastest in the world, defeating royal guards easily while playing with them, tamed a city in a few hours, kidnapped great nobles and plundered, made Tywin himself a fool, and even tortured his best hound, unbeatable at sea, like a kraken, destroying entire fleets without leaving anyone alive. More cruel than the Mad King, as powerful as the king and all the armies of Westeros together. They say he will dominate the 7 kingdoms like Aegon did almost 300 years ago, he said. This is absurd. We should have killed him when Eddard Stark brought him as a baby to the Red Keep. Cersei exclaimed angrily and fearfully. He will face my father's wrath, she said at the end. No point lamenting the past. Baelish spoke in a more rational tone. Now we should be preparing for an attack from him, he said. We should lock down the castle and eliminate any animals. Pycelle said, and everyone agreed. They continued the meeting while talking a bit more before ending it, and they quickly went to do their things to get out of this crisis. What are you looking at? Are you in King's Land again? The voice of Serena asked Jon by his bedside. Yes, enjoying the fear they're feeling at this moment, which I don't understand. After all, I'm just returning everything they threw at me in kind, Jon mocked. How are they reacting to your threats? She asked. Well, Varys is hiding in the secret passages of the fortress. Jon Arryn is sending letters everywhere asking for help. Pycelle doesn't know what to do. After all, there is no longer a citadel where he needs to report on the events. Barristan is at the king's door, while the queen is inside it after expelling the prostitutes, after she wrote a letter to her father begging for help. She now seems to be wanting to seduce him, something strange for someone who despises him. But she wants him to go fight, even calling him a coward while his men fight, and he stands still. She clearly wants to see him dead, perhaps for her bastard to take the throne. But the funniest thing is Baelish. He is fleeing the city. He is scared, and I like that. Jon laughed, seeing the latter being very afraid. After all, he had a malicious smile when he was at an advantage, but when he saw himself being cornered, his mask fell to that of a frightened rat. Anyway, let's go outside. It's already mid-morning, she suggested, and Jon nodded. He left the cabin, facing the now pacified pirate city with giants walking through it, while there were many dead on the ground thinking they could fight them. which ended in another massacre. While one part of the fleet took care of the city, another part was next to the city, starting mass production of wildfire with materials Jon had and a substance he created through nature to produce the formula. There were pyromancers and Artican alchemists among them, as they continued producing and filling the stocks. 2 more days, we'll be ready to set sail again, Jon said unhurriedly. The ships of Westeros would take time to reach here if they came to attack. And even so, if the king wanted to participate, a meeting between him and Jon would be interesting. This continued while they finally managed to complete a large quantity and began leaving the ships after destroying the plantations Jon created outside the city. The ships soon began to leave the port, heading northward to sea. Let's go, men. Some men from Westeros are ahead to challenge us. Let's prepare to see why Artika should not be challenged. Jon exclaimed as everyone nodded with a war cry. Did you manage to call Sarum to help you? Arya asked, but Jon shook his head. My connection is cut off with anything beyond the wall. It makes me lose connection just as it does with the South. I can't spy on them as I'm doing at this moment. Jon spoke. It was strange, but there was nothing to do about it. Perhaps he would destroy it in the future. He didn't know yet. But anyway, he would leave that for the future and focus on now, as this would be the last challenge before he finally returned to his lands. At this moment, Robert Baratheon was on a boat. By his side, his squire, Lancel Lannister, trembled with fear as they were going to a naval war against Artika with the northern fleet approaching those waters. Let's go, men. We need to show that whelp from the north what happens to those who challenge me, he exclaimed, while he barely managed to don armor, but seemed confident. Robert had decided to go to war against Artika at sea, after being mocked by Cersei after they slept together, who said she no longer felt any lust for him. After all, he was no longer the king he used to be. This enraged him, and he sent his wife away, calling her an ungrateful whore, but that left him so furious that he immediately asked for his hammer and declared he would go to war. Jon Arryn tried to stop the king in every possible way when he heard of the madness, but Robert was determined to go into battle and simply refused all appeals and advanced to one of the ships. Cersei saw this with a satisfied look. Robert could die in this war, and her son would assume Westeros with her as his regent until he came of age. Her gaze went to a sound she heard above and saw a bird, which immediately reminded her of the danger. She was running, and she ran inside again. Robert did not board a ship in the Blackwater alone. After all, Barristan Selmy also went with him. He would have taken more Kingsguard, but the queen hysterically begged that the other 4 Kingsguard stay to protect her and her children, since she had been threatened by Jon Artika. A few days at sea, they finally encountered the fleet in front of Dragonstone, while Stannis Baratheon awaited the arrival of his brother. Your Majesty, Stannis knelt as he approached his brother. Enough of this, Stannis. Let's just head to sea and I'll be in command. We have to destroy that Artican fleet and show Ned's son what happens to those who do as they please on my lands. I want to leave now because I don't want to be in front of Dragonstone. It reminds me of those damn dragons. Robert spoke at the end, while Stannis only nodded, and they headed to sea with 300 ships gathered with Valerion and other houses that joined them. My king, can we really defeat them? I saw that they destroyed 200 ships without losing a single one in the west. Can we face them? Kevin Lannister's son, Lancel Lannister, murmured fearfully. Don't be a coward, damn Lannister. Let's show them what we can do too. Robert spoke to the squire, despising him as he did with all the Lannisters. Robert looked forward with interest in the battle that would soon follow, and the days continued until they encountered the enemy, with Robert Baratheon's confident look finally giving way, filled by a shocked expression. He barely had time to process everything that was happening at this moment as men shouted in despair beside him. Explosions erupted from all sides as green flames rose to the sky. They were in the midst of the confrontation, at sea losing more and more ships, which until then, they believed to be an easy battle to win. They saw something unbelievable. While giants on those ships continued launching those things at such a distance that they could not counterattack, only watch their ships being blown up by wildfire. We can't stay here, Stannis exclaimed to Robert. He wasn't even wearing armor, just trying to carry his hammer. dragging it while his belly showed using a coat of iron with leather. There were only a few plates on the shoulders and arms, which was quite pitiful for a king. Lancel Lannister was trembling beside him, and Barristan Selmy was quite dazed. "Let's turn around, Your Majesty, before they can catch us." The commander of the King's Guard pleaded for his king to retreat, as they would be completely destroyed otherwise. "They're surrounding us," Lancel Lannister exclaimed, pointing as part of the Artican fleet began to flank them from the west so they couldn't escape easily. The ships that approached them to counterattack were struck and exploded. Finally, the attack stopped. "Do they have no more stock?" Robert murmured. "It seems so." Stannis spoke, but still with a grim demeanor. They had lost half the fleet in such a short time. "They're advancing," Barristan commented, as enemy ships began slicing through the sea in flames to reach them. "Archers, prepare to launch fire arrows. Burn those damned ships," Stannis exclaimed as the surviving ships began to organize. They prepared arrows and launched them at the enemies, but then another explosion emerged from the ships with spinning wheels and steel cables destroying the arrows and advancing towards the enemy, as the ships were cut and destroyed when caught by those strange things. "What the hell is that?" Robert could hardly believe it, as the ships destroyed their attack and came closer. All around was a hell of men screaming while dying to their sides, with them trying to attack again, and more of those things flying in the air with almost no fire arrow reaching the ships. The Articans finally began to board the ships, and despite them destroying 150 enemy ships, it did not stop them from continuing to attack, as they launched more giant harpoons destroying the wood of the ships. The ships of Westeros were completely demoralized, with the overwhelming pressure being a considerable part of them dead at that moment. Their king seemed not to know what to do, while Barristan Selmy continued beside him to protect him with his life. The ships of Artika finally crashed against those of Westeros, with giants coming out, at least 2, 3, or 4 from each of the ships. "By the gods, look at those monsters!" Robb exclaimed, looking at the creature for the first time as it easily reaped the life of a man on nearby ships. "A ship is approaching," Stannis exclaimed before they felt the impact hitting them. A person landed inside the ship as he stood up and looked at everyone on deck with interest. "Ned," was Robert's first thought when he noticed Jon, murmuring aloud. He looked very much like his foster brother. "So you're the king of Westeros," Jon declared with disdain, as Robert looked stunned, and even Stannis seemed to share his demeanor. Lannister appeared to be trembling like a soulless being, seeing Jon looking so confident in front of them. But no one noticed Barristan, shocked, seeming to wonder if he was dreaming at that moment. "Rhaegar," the man murmured while only Jon was able to hear that, raising an eyebrow at those words. But he soon put aside that thought and drew his blades. Barristan, finally coming back to the danger, immediately shouted, "Protect the king!" He exclaimed as all the soldiers there drew their blades to stand between King Jon Artika and King Robert Baratheon. But behind Jon, new men jumped from the ship while dwarves carrying giant hammers, bigger than what King Robert had, began to strike at the men, sending them flying with the force they put into the attacks. As the Artican men began to easily cut through the defenses and enter the ship, clearing the way for Jon, the Artican king prepared his 2 blades approaching, while Barristan, despite still looking dazed at Jon as if he had seen someone from his past, went head-on to face Jon. After all, he had to protect the king. Their first move made the 2 blades clash, and this initiated a fierce fight as Jon and Barristan began to duel amid that chaos. As the Articans began to massacre Robert's men, Robert hoped that anyone would come forward to fight him, but no one advanced, as it seemed that Jon had issued an order for no one to touch him. And he just exclaimed, "Why won't you come fight me? Show what you're capable of, people beyond the wall," he shouted. The fight with Jon continued as he began to move with more speed in his combat against the man, fighting with a Valyrian steel sword and another of Elden metal, clashing and striking against the single blade the knight used. The man was truly skilled, and Jon had to admit that his reputation was well-deserved as the greatest in Westeros. But Barristan finally yielded, looking dazed as his blade fell to the ground before receiving a punch from Jon and falling unconscious with a blow to the head. Stannis Baratheon ended up in a fight against a dwarf while striking with the enemy's hammer, but he too was a brilliant and experienced commander. "Seems I found a skilled big man here," the dwarf exclaimed while trying to win with the advantage of strength. "These bastards," Robert murmured, already seeing that his ship was being dominated like many others around him. He looked ahead, noticing Jon walking after defeating Barristan, and Robert stared at him too. Kevin's son, who was still trembling until he couldn't stand it anymore, dropped the sword and ran away screaming, with Jon raising an eyebrow at this. "Damn cowardly Lannister," Robert murmured and turned back to Jon. "So you're Ned's son? You really have his face, though your eyes are quite strange," he commented. "And you're the man my father used to praise when I lived in Winterfell as a child." Jon commented. "Let's see if you're all that my father used to talk about," Jon said with a rather disappointed look at the fat man. "Do you really have the guts for this, boy? Come on then, I'll show you how my hammer crushes my enemies," he said as he advanced, his hammer finally lifting from the ground and swinging toward Jon in a vertical attack. But he was so slow that Jon made no effort to dodge, and, as he jumped to the side, watching the hammer crash into the wood of the deck. Before Robert could turn around, he immediately felt a punch in the stomach, causing him to fall backward, dropping the hammer. "You really are nothing like what I've heard, King of Westeros," Jon commented, disappointed that this man, who one day had issued an order for him to come to King's Landing many years ago and even asked him to create armor. Although this fat man was not as scheming as the other fools of that council, he was still an idiot. "You damn, just because you're Ned's son doesn't mean I'll go easy on you," he said as he got up. "You attacked my city, you destroyed my soldiers, and even threatened my wife. I'm gonna beat you up, kid," he said, finishing getting up, until he finally stood up and looked at Jon. Although still a bit breathless from the punch, he advanced, and Jon, seeing this, dropped his blades and advanced against the man too, and before Robert could get close enough to embrace him as he intended, using the size of his body against Jon. Jon held him while being pushed slightly back, but soon Robert not only felt himself unable to advance further, but also felt his own body being lifted by Jon, someone much smaller than him in terms of body, and Robert felt his world spin as he was thrown to the ground. "Trust me, you fool, if you knew what I know about your queen, you'd be thanking me for this. I'm not going to kill you, don't worry, since you are important to my father," he said. And before Robert could try to do anything, he received a punch from Jon, feeling his world spin even more. "But that doesn't mean I won't beat you up," Jon spoke again as he delivered another punch, and then another, and another, and another, until Robert could no longer reason as he received more blows, feeling his nose breaking along with parts of his face and blood spurting from him, obscuring his entire vision. Jon only stopped after seeing Stannis defeated by his opponent. "OOBWWW, looks like the fool has finally fallen," the dwarf exclaimed, laughing. Jon saw that most of the surviving ships were already retreating in fear, and the others were being massacred. He sighed before shouting with magic, "Let's return to the ships. We'll continue north. There's nothing more for us here," he said at the end, before starting to board the ships and regroup the fleet before returning to the Artika route without any more trouble at sea. Jon left that ship with the squire hidden inside the cabin, trembling with fear, a beaten king with an unrecognizable and swollen face, the king's brother fallen on the ground with the main royal guard also fallen on the deck, after losing the fight. The ships had left, fleeing with their unconscious king on one of the ships while some of the ships returned to check on the king's situation, heading defeated to Dragonstone. Jaime was arriving at the ship at this moment in the city with his own father, who made it a point to come here to resolve the mess the Artikans are causing chaos in Westeros. The fleet's ships were already arriving at the port with the owner returning from the fight, while the city was all agitated, after all the news of the terrible defeat at sea spread quickly through the city, with the king falling in battle. "It seems that the efforts have only left Westeros even weaker," Tywin said with a dissatisfied tone as he walked through the streets of Kingsland with his guards as they approached Red Keep. The city seemed to have a somber climate, but without problems until they reached the fortress. While they were greeted by Lannister men, the city was full of them, since Tywin and Cersei were wanting to place more power of their house there. It seems that there is no one to receive us, Tywin said with a dissatisfied tone as a royal guard approached him at the entrance. Lord Tywin, Ser Jaime, it's good to see that you are well, the man said with a respectful tone to Tywin, despite not having the same with Jaime. After all, he was the Kingslayer, a reputation not very favorable even among the royal guard. Where is the hand of the king or my daughter? Tywin could understand that Robert would not be there after the destruction he caused, but he expected some of them. As the king has just arrived, a council meeting was held at this moment while we were trying to control all our losses. The man said, so Robert ended up losing. Jaime was quite surprised by the news that Robert was in the attack. It would be funny to see a man so fat trying to go into combat. He might be the king, but Jaime despised him inside after all these years of humiliation that he and even Cersei suffer from the Baratheon. Watch your words, Ser. He is still your king and is alive, the royal guard said with a severe tone. Can we go to the council? Tywin didn't want this to extend despite not liking these words to his son. The royal guard nodded and began to enter the castle to ask for permission to enter the meeting while the Lannister guards who accompanied the two stayed outside. My king, one of the royal guards entered the door. What now? Robert growled at the man. His state was deplorable as he was sitting in a chair with Pycelle tending to his injuries. He had lost some teeth while his two eyes were swollen, one of them not having his vision at the moment. Tywin Lannister is here. He wants permission to enter. The guard spoke. That old lion is here. Send him away while we are dealing with more important things. Robert growled with his usual disdain for the lions. Wait, your majesty, Jon Arryn said. Lord Tywin fought the Artikans and had some losses. We should let him add his opinions in this meeting. He suggested. What did he lose? Saw his lion cub captured and lost some ships. We are talking about the destruction of hundreds of ships. Westeros has just lost all its naval strength to the Artikans. He growled and raged, being more frustrated than rational, but then sighed a little before continuing. Let be. Let him in, he said at the end while the royal guard returned. Tywin entered alone a moment later, with a serious and calculating look, looking at the only ones there, Robert, Pycelle, Jon Arryn, Varys, Stannis, and Barristan, the latter two also being injured, but the king was the worst. Lord Tywin, the hand greeted him. While the others did the same with the exception of the king, Tywin approached and bowed to Robert with the respect deserved by someone of his status. Come on, old lion. We are in a complicated situation. Could you tell me how your ships were destroyed and how your hound turned into an animal without a penis and tongue? Robert mocked frustrated at Tywin, who despite his dangerous glare, stayed silent with the king's insults. We are trying to see how we will deal with this threat, Jon Arryn commented. I see that the Master of Coin is not present, Tywin observed, and before he could continue, Robert exclaimed, that coward ran away after receiving a threat from Ned's son. I swear I'll beat him when I see him. Robert growled. Tywin waited for Robert to finish before continuing. From what I understand, we are in a complicated situation, for 100 ships of Westeros were destroyed, striking hard at our forces. But have you come to a conclusion? He asked. We are working on it, Lord Tywin. But as you can see, our forces don't know how to deal with a fleet that can launch wildfire with the strength of 4-meter men. I don't think there is any force in the world that can stop them on water, Varys replied. Then don't fight on water. In fact, don't fight at all. Tywin spoke while everyone looked at him curiously. After all, everyone had to admit that he was an excellent commander. What do you mean by that? Stannis spoke, his arm bandaged after being broken with a hammer bigger than his brother uses. You know we cannot stay silent after this, Tywin began. We can send a small force beyond the wall for them to find Artika, he said. But that's madness. Fighting beyond the wall will be a great loss for Westeros. Jon Arryn said, fearing more loss of Westeros men like that. Fighting beyond the wall is very bad. We should draw him to the south again, Stannis said. You're right, but you see, our chances are small like this, and I'm sure your majesty would not be happy to use Lord Stark to attract his son. Would you? Tywin said calmly while the others thought, but Robert quickly raised his voice. Of course not, he growled. Fighting against the Artican kingdom seems very bad. We can send a small force, so we do not leave this atrocity unanswered, but we can also make a deal in the end. I heard about the cancelled marriage proposal of Arya Stark with my grandson, preferring Sansa Stark, which I think is foolish. But I have another proposal. Reach an agreement where Jon Artika reimburses everything he destroyed from Westeros and propose my granddaughter, Myrcella, for a marriage. Tywin spoke. Do you wish to make Myrcella a concubine, my lord? Pycelle seemed offended by that while Jon Arryn looked strangely. I spoke with Jon Artika personally. Despite being surprised by his cruelty, he still keeps a good head on his shoulders. I'd rather have my granddaughter being a third wife of a king, thus gaining the title of Queen of Artika, than marrying any house in Westeros. You've seen their military power, their riches, and a boy who became the greatest blade of Westeros, so young and knows how to command a kingdom. Tywin said, looking at Barristan, who also fell to Jon Artika, and it should have been easy. While Jon Arryn and Pycelle did not seem in favor of this, but Robert seemed thoughtful, the suggestion from Tywin was not repulsive. It can be done. He said in the end, after all, it was a chance for both parties to reach an agreement in the end, and he would have a union of a Stark and a Baratheon too, even more so when his grandchildren could be as powerful as their father, as he personally felt being carried by that inhuman strength. My king, you cannot be serious. Jon Arryn was against the idea of marriage with more than one wife, especially putting his daughter as the third wife of a kingdom that destroyed them and that had a different religion from his. Jon prepared to send letters, a letter to Ned, the Wall, and to all the great houses. I want a small army invading the wildlands. Then we'll talk about the marriage. Even Robert understood the importance of sending an army as a response to the north of the Wall. After all, everyone on this continent could think he was afraid of the Artikans after what they did, sacrificing a small number of men and then creating a peace agreement between the kingdoms, giving his daughter as a bride, was something that could work out very well. As the meeting continued in detail, Jaime went to his sister's room, only to find that Cersei had not attended the meeting because she was trapped in her room. He approached the place, noticing a royal guard at the door, but he soon spotted something odd. The door was scratched with some type of blade. Jaime greeted the royal guard and entered, seeing his sister startled by his entrance before closing the door. "Jaime!" she screamed, nodding with relief that it wasn't an assassin, as she had been very afraid after all these days. "It's so good to see you here, Jaime. You have no idea what I've been through. There's an assassin after me ever since that savage threatened me." Cersei exclaimed angrily, tears streaming from her eyes, her fear outweighing her anger now. "Cersei, what happened?" Jaime swallowed hard, remembering Jon Artika's words about wanting to kill his sister. "I don't know. Every time I leave my room, the door seems more and more scratched. Sometimes I can hear it being scratched at night when the guards are changing shifts. I'm scared. Jaime, he's a demon who wants to kill me. I even see birds following me, as if they're watching me. He's spying on me. He also knows about our children." Each time Cersei exclaimed, she became more horrified, and Jaime frowned. Though this last part was not a secret, seeing Cersei in this state made him angry. But what more could he do? "I know, Cersei. He told me," Jaime admitted, though he remembered some unpleasant things like Cersei having more lovers. But he chose not to believe it. "We must kill him. We can't let him live. We're in danger." She seemed to become hysterical. "Father is here. We must tell him about a faceless assassin immediately," she exclaimed rapidly. "I don't know if that would be possible. You saw how they could destroy any enemy. Westeros cannot fight against them, let alone a faceless assassin." Jaime didn't believe in victory against Artika after what he had seen. What else might they be hiding beyond the wall? And from what he had heard in the men's conversations, there were at least several times the number of soldiers than ships. Jon Artika said that you tried to capture his wife. Jaime asked cautiously, wanting to know the truth because the Artican wanted to kill her with so much effort. Cersei was a bit cornered by his question. "I did what was necessary," she said, and Jaime for a moment wanted to hit her for this madness, as it triggered her situation. Jaime was about to speak, but the door opened at that moment with Tywin Lannister entering. "Father!" Cersei quickly cried out as he approached, crying. "Stop it, you fool. I already know about your situation, sending a fleet to kill a foreign queen. I expected more from you, Cersei. Tywin had enough spies to know the whole truth. But I did what I had to do. With her, we would have had the Artican king in our hands." She argued. "You always thought you were smarter than you are. Now, let's clean up this mess." Tywin said, going to a glass of wine and drinking it, then turning to his 2 children afterward. "If we can't beat him in battle, we can join them. The king and I believe that having Myrcella marry him would be smarter for an alliance," he said. "No!" Cersei screamed immediately, while Jaime was surprised. "It's already decided," Tywin told his daughter. "Father, you can't be serious about sending Myrcella north of the wall to marry a savage," she exclaimed, while Tywin wanted to slap his daughter. "That savage is richer than most houses in Westeros and has just brought Westeros to its knees by destroying the largest fleet we had at sea. You fool. It's decided." He spoke, leaving no room for complaint, while Cersei couldn't even leave the room due to her condition. Elsewhere, Cersei was not the only one afraid of assassins. Baelish was hidden away in a place resembling a bunker or an isolated room in the castle. He had left the city and gone to one of his friends in the Crown Lands, where he negotiated to stay hidden. He only received food at the location, while he remained isolated until the assassin would leave, because he had been receiving assassination attempt from a bird that had nearly caught him several times on his way. He was afraid of losing his life, so he simply disappeared to stay here until Jon Artika left, as he knew it was him in that animal. "Why do you Starks always stand in my way?" Baelish growled with all his might, as a piece of wood in the ceiling opened with a beak appearing and a bird with an iron claw entered the place, eyeing its prey there before swooping down on him. The Artican fleet continued heading north, passing by White Harbor, ships fleeing from them all the time, and some had the Manderly symbol on their sails, but they seemed too afraid to approach them. "Arya," Jon called the girl's attention at his side. "You will have to return to Winterfell afterward and then to Essos," Jon said. After all, his sister needed to see her family. "Yes," Arya nodded. Jon had wanted her to go see them and stay in Winterfell during this trip some time ago, but Arya did not want to miss going and promised that she would do it after the journey. With that, they continued cutting through the North Sea, arriving at Skagos weeks after the battle in front of the Sea of Dragonstone. Making the same route they took from Artika, Jon looked at the mountains with interest, feeling if he could sense that dragon he had encountered before. "I can still feel it there, but it's rejecting my presence, and it's better I do not insist," Jon thought. After all, he could not fight an enraged dragon with the fleet and without Aragon at his side, wanting to do that later. They did not have the courage to come close to the fleet. Ned Stark was reading a letter from the Manderlys who approached the fleet to request a talk, wanting Jon to come to Winterfell, but the men did not have the courage, not that he could blame them after what happened in the south. "This is bad. Then they are returning beyond the wall, and no one can do anything," Luwin commented beside him. While his lord asked him to come advise him, his wife no longer seemed the right woman to be at his side when it comes to Jon and Arya. Jon kidnapped Tywin's son in addition to assaulting 2 royal guards, killed a bunch of Septons and a maester, plundered Old Town, destroyed the largest fleet of the Reach, defeated the royal fleet, and defeated Robert in battle. Ned could not be surprised by all this. Things were going so well. I believed everything was going so well. Luwin commented. He could not have imagined such a scenario with that boy who was usually depressed in Winterfell until his 8 named days. "I don't know what to think. This isn't what I taught Jon, but I wanted to talk to him personally to see what happened from his version." Ned was a man who valued honor above all, but he also cared deeply for his family. He wanted to know what motivated Jon to commit such crimes. He was still a bit angry, especially taking Arya along with him. Now the king wants a meeting with him, and is also asking for a group of soldiers from the great houses to launch an attack beyond the wall with the Night's Watch as a response of retaliation. "I'm sure you will find out soon enough, my lord," Luwin commented, offering some support to his lord while Ned nodded. In the end, Ned stood up and headed to the Great Hall, where his family awaited his entrance. He looked at Robb, who was holding his 16 named days, already a man, and in a few more years, he would assume Winterfell in his place. Sansa, almost 14 with 13 named days, was becoming a beautiful woman, and Robert had stated that he wanted her as a bride for his son after canceling the marriage with Arya. Bran, with 11 named days, was growing up, though he seemed very lonely, and Rickon was quite restless with his nearly 8 named days. His family was almost complete, except for Jon and Arya. "Father, any news of Jon?" Bran immediately exclaimed as everyone looked at him curiously. What Jon had done was already public in Winterfell, with most looking at him somberly and even fearfully. But Bran seemed to adore what he heard, despite Ned always saying that what Jon was doing was a dishonorable crime. Yet, he still shared some news of Jon and Arya. Even Robb and Theon no longer insulted Jon after what they heard, seeming to start fearing him. Ned sighed and began to relay some things he had heard, while his wife looked at him like a hawk killing its prey. Meanwhile, the Artican fleet finally passed the line of the wall, and Jon felt losing all his connections south of it, as if it were a great barrier stopping his warg magic, no longer able to see what was happening in King's Land or any other place in the kingdom. Once again, the group from Hardhome seemed more than just half a year since they had departed, and after following for a few more days, they finally found the channel that would take them back to Artika. "Finally, we are back," Arya exclaimed joyfully. "Yes, I'll drink to celebrate after getting so sick of so many Southerners," Tormund exclaimed excitedly. "We've arrived," Serena murmured next to Jon while touching her large belly, as she was a moon away from giving birth to their son. "Yes, we are finally home," Jon said in the end, and the ships continued moving, approaching closer to the statue of Jon marking the entrance of Artika, with the year finally turning to 296 AC. The giant statue of Artika was finally in front of the fleet as they began to pass it, with Jon's ship leading them, and the immense city was in sight. "It looks bigger," Arya exclaimed joyfully. "Who said the city stopped expanding while we were gone?" Serena commented. "But it's incredible. We've been out for over 7 moons. It's 296 AC. Arya exclaimed as Jon moved past them, heading to the bow of the ship, passing more men, and finally standing at the tip of the ship as he breathed in the fresh air of his realm, feeling his strength and magic rapidly recovering here. The world around him had changed at this moment. He could see the world on another plane, the spiritual plane, as a magnificent scene grew around him, the stars with the entire galaxy in their essence shining above him, with the center being a glare in space. Looking forward, another star show emerged as he saw the great weirwood tree shine magnificently, bursting with vitality as if it were on fire. Beneath it, he could also see the grove lighting up below the trunk, but nothing compared to the great tree. Even at that distance, Jon could see the place like no one else here. This was Artika, the place where he could connect with the gods. What would they call this place in the future? Second Valyria? The Garden of Eden? The beacon of the world? Jon didn't know, but he was certainly satisfied to have his role in building this place in this world. This would be his legacy and pass on to his children and future generations. He cracked a smile, but soon left those thoughts of the future of this world aside and focused on the now, returning to see the world as any ordinary person, while his smile widened with a look upwards. The powerful roar managed to shake the ship as the entire fleet looked up, with huge wings covering the sun. Aragon descended into the channel meeting the ships, before he flapped his wings and circled the sky, passing very close to Jon's ship, while his personal crew stared at the gray and green eyes with their sapphires. "Aragon!" Arya exclaimed with excitement and admiration. "That dragon isn't going to stop growing, is it?" A dwarf complained, as was his natural impulse against dragons. "It's good to see you again," Jon murmured as Aragon once again cut through the air, circling the main ship, staring Jon towards the city. Aragon had grown at least half of what he already was before, becoming a dragon of a house and a half. Even though Jon wasn't here, it seemed that the weirwood itself was strengthening him. His gaze dropped from Aragon to the plantations around him. Animals began to run over the canal on the left side of Artika, where the forest lay, running freely. Huge packs of wolves were howling, while the wolf on Jon's ship did the same, putting his head up and roaring. Artikans working on the farms went to the side of the river as they exclaimed to the ships following the channel, "Welcome! Finally back!" Jon could hear them as they continued to exclaim many phrases. Phoenix and blue fire landed on the edge of the ship. "Are you also excited to be home?" Jon asked with a smile to the two brothers. Another sound came from the air, and the giant waterfowl flew over the ship along with Aragon, with another giant bird appearing beside it. "It seems your parents are also here to greet us," Jon murmured, and they continued on. The city grew larger, and the tree began to rise into the sky as its size became more distinct. Among the ships, Eric looked satisfied while his new companion seemed paralyzed with the vision in front of her. "What is that thing?" she exclaimed to the huge lizard flying over the front ships. "It's a dragon, the king's dragon," Eric replied. "That's impossible," she murmured, her eyes trembling at the sight of a real dragon living here as her gaze fell forward, where she could see the city of her future husband. "This is the realm you live in." She, as a southerner who had never seen Artika, was mesmerized, wondering how such a place could exist in this world, even more so to the north of the ice wall. "Fantastic, isn't it? When I first came here, this tree was just a few meters tall," Eric said beside her with a smile. "I heard Harrenhal was 90 meters. This is even bigger," she exclaimed, looking over the fields above the canal full of plantations, stretching kilometers away. "It's much prettier than the Reach," she murmured. It didn't take long for a crowd of people to appear in front of the ships as they approached the harbor. The people of Artika were about to receive them as a whole, gathering as many people as possible from all four races that complemented Artika. "This place is," Archmaester Marwyn murmured, stunned by the sight in front of him, seeing the well-structured city with rivers running through it, several colossal buildings surrounding the great weirwood. "Calm down, maester. You'll have plenty of time to get to know this place." Jon approached the deck to begin disembarking from the ship and saw the startled look of the Archmaester he had brought from the citadel. Jon couldn't blame him. His view was filled with a dragon flying over the ship, a giant sacred tree over 100 meters casting a shadow over the city with its enormous branches, green fields, and a very well-structured city. The man just nodded, but he couldn't help but still marvel wordlessly, turning his attention to the master. Jon looked at his men. "Come on, let's get ready to finally disembark on our lands," Jon exclaimed as the men began to work on the ship, closing the sails and preparing to dock it at a special port for his ship amidst the crowd with many important people waiting for them, including his other pregnant wife. Ignoring the fights that were now breaking out between Tormund and some dwarfs, Jon went to one of the edges of the ship, looking at the city while wearing his black and red armor with designs of Aragon and Ghost, symbolizing his main animals. He wore this formally to demonstrate the glory of Artika on his return to these lands. His wife appeared beside him, wearing a black dress with some elven metal plates interlacing on her arm between her armor. Her belly was bigger than ever as she touched it with her other hand and looked at the city in front of her. "How do you think Ygritte has been doing?" she asked calmly. "Probably better than she was on the ships," Jon replied softly, eager to see her too. Of course, he had already sneaked a peek, and she seemed very well. She had the same volume as Serena and seemed excited, waiting for them in front of all of Artika. The ship began to approach as everyone became visible to them, and it started to dock at this moment. Exclamations arose from the crowd the next moment with the people shouting for the king. His first business trip ended in war, but he managed to complete it in his main objectives, and this made Jon feel that it was all worth it. The ship finally stopped, and a ramp descended as Jon began to disembark with Serena by his side. There were all sorts of people there, but the entire port was filled with tens of thousands of people. Jon could see the children of the forest dancing here and there. In front of him, there were the ministers of Artika, including the royal guards who stayed, and Ygritte to be the first to receive them, with a dress suitable for a queen, calmly waiting, opening a smile for them. Jon approached as his royal guards came right behind Arya and with the other crew members. The other ships began to dock in various parts of the harbor, while the Artikans began to exclaim from their places at each of their docks, looking quite excited about their arrival and eager to hear stories from the south. Jon approached Ygritte, as she grabbed him by the waist and gave him a kiss on his forehead. "How have you been?" he asked, as Serena opened a smile by his side to her sister-in-law. "I'm fine. The children of the forest surround me all the time, and I'm surrounded by animals all the time," she said with a provocative tone. "Jon, don't tell me you were spying on me even from the other side of the continent," she commented before even broadening a smile. "But now I'm quite happy that you're here. Our daughter is ready to come out soon. Husband," she said, touching her belly. "That's great. Let's save that talk for the castle. I see it's finally ready." It seems that once the walls reached a point surrounding Artika, the constructions in the city quickly began to grow with the teams splitting up to build the city. Jon said, satisfied. He asked his wife to accompany him along with Serena and moved forward as he approached the ministers, all trusted people who did not seem to disappoint him while he was away, including Maester Aemon, Brynden Rivers among other ministers, and the royal guards. None of them kneeled. After all, the people of Artika do not kneel to anyone, not even their king. As for the king of Artika, respect is enough. "My king, it's so good to see you again," Aemon commented with a smile. He seemed to remain quite healthy as he faced him with a gleam of happiness in his purple eyes. "We're finally back. I am pleased. But let's talk tomorrow about the status quo of Artika. For now, let's just focus this day on a celebration for all those who returned with me and the results we achieved." Jon decreed, "We must have a proper banquet for our heroes." Jon spoke as one of the ministers quickly stepped forward. "A banquet for this day has indeed been instructed as soon as our wargs spotted the ships passing the wall line." He spoke and Jon nodded. "That's good. I hope the first batch of animals brought from Dorne is being well utilized." Jon commented, "Yes, my king. The large batch that came of the first part of the fleet, they are already in the forest beginning to reproduce, and we managed to have enough for a great feast, feeding the entire population," Brynden replied. "Good," said Jon, nodding once more. "Then decree to everyone that we will have a great banquet in the great arena. In the meantime, let's organize the ships." Jon spoke as everyone nodded. They began to organize the crowd. There were still curious glances while Jon instructed here and there, with some important items for him. "I put some separate boxes in my cabin. I want them all brought to the castle, to my royal room. And I want total attention on these items. They are precious," Jon decreed. The books and dragon eggs were all organized. Meanwhile, Ygritte looked at her husband maintaining a book at Jon's waist, finding it odd. "What is that book, Jon?" she asked. "I want to keep this with me. I'll read it later," Jon said. The crowd in front of them began to make space as a huge wolf emerged at this moment, walking with some haste towards the group, heading towards Jon with his tongue out. Jon smiled as soon as he turned to Ghost, touching his forehead with his own and stroking under his neck. "It's so good to see you again, buddy. Did you take good care of Ygritte and your daughter?" Jon said, feeling the connection that both had returned stronger than ever. This meeting seemed to cause jealousy in someone, as a huge shadow covered the crowd with everyone screaming in fright, stepping back, as Aragon landed in front of the harbor, placing a part of his body on Jon's ship, making it sink a bit, causing it to sway and scaring the men inside. The other part was on the harbor with the front mats. He looked at Jon with intense dissatisfaction. "Your dragon seemed not to handle your absence very well," Ygritte said by his side. Jon smiled at the dragon's jealousy breaking parts of his ship, but he didn't mind that and returned to his wives. "Well, wait for me in the castle. I'll be there soon," Jon said, now turning back to Ghost. "Sorry, buddy, but we'll have to take a walk later." He then left the group and went towards the dragon, continuing to stare at him without taking his eyes off him. Seeing Jon coming towards him, he quickly seemed more satisfied, lowering his head. Jon touched his face calmly, feeling the warmth of his white dragon. He wasted no more time and began to climb him, getting on his back. The dragon seemed to submit a bit while he calmly opened his wings in front of everyone. "Let's go. It's been a while since we've done this together," Jon said, and the dragon gained momentum the next moment. Its wings beat and it began to rise into the air, generating a wave of wind at the dock, and the crowd could only watch their king elegantly depart once more into the skies of Artika. After moons without this, Jon circled his realm atop his dragon, passing through the great structures, slicing through the sacred tree as he sped past the branches. Aragorn seemed to be learning new tricks, and Jon was not displeased about this, enjoying the adrenaline rush while relishing the ride with his companion. This continued for hours while the fleet began to organize itself, separating the horses they had taken from the reach to the open fields and taking the books directly to the library. The breeding animals were also taken to a forest where they would be placed in the forests with the other animals later. Serena went to see the castle, shown around by Ygritte herself while the pregnant women were accompanied by Ghost. It was almost late afternoon when Jon landed in front of the castle. He traveled through all of Artika, passing through the great structures and new constructions completed since he had left. The city continued in a grand celebration before the banquet, as people from the ships were celebrated with glory and some mourned relatives lost in battles they heard about, yet proud to have fought for the glory of this kingdom. Jon touched Aragorn before he left and looked at the place that would now officially be his home, no longer needing to sleep in the great weirwood. This place really is suitable for having a large family, Jon murmured, approaching his wives waiting for him at the entrance. They entered as Jon dismissed the royal guard to spend time alone with them. "Jon, the dwarves built this place so big." Ygritte complained a bit. How many children do you plan to have?" "There are hundreds of rooms in this castle," she said. His castle was at least 50 meters tall, not very high, but Jon did not need height when there was a massive tree within the castle. Yet the place was larger than the Red Keep in Winterfell. Jon looked at Ygritte with a smile. "And who said we can't have our grandchildren and great-grandchildren here?" Jon retorted. "I can't disagree with that," Serena murmured. "Perhaps great-great-grandchildren and beyond. It would be quite interesting," she added. "Anyway," Ygritte resumed, giving Jon a seductive look now that only the three of them were alone near the bedroom. "I've been months without my husband. Could you take care of your wife right now?" she said with the tone of her eyes. "If my queen wants me, I can't refuse her, can I?" Jon said calmly, heading to the bedroom. In the end, Serena also joined them in bed, and the three of them had some moments of pleasure, having a light activity given the children's situation. When night fell, Arya was in the castle yelling at them whether they would attend the party or not. When she reached the room, all three were already dressed, prepared for the banquet, wearing appropriate clothes as king and queens. "Come on, Arya. We have a great banquet to celebrate." Jon spoke, and carts with the blue-horned servant, like Jon used at the wedding, were waiting for them as they left the castle. They proceeded to the arena where everyone in Artika was gathered that night. Again, Jon hosted a huge banquet while everyone enjoyed with stories from the south, conversing with their acquaintances who had traveled with the king. In the middle of the night, Jon raised his glass, while everyone fell silent, as it was the moment when the king spoke about the journey to the south. "As you know, we returned from the south not on a peaceful journey," Jon began, as the rumors must have already spread throughout Artika. Everyone was aware of the maritime battles they had encountered. Not that the people were pleased with this. In fact, they were more frustrated because they were not there too. This kingdom was largely made up of people who wielded their own weapons, so it was a common sentiment. Jon then continued, "Even so, we achieved what we wanted for a new step in the progress of this kingdom, and I intend to spend the next moon years developing this place with these resources. We may have made an enemy in the south, but we will quickly prove to them that they should not mess with Artika. That is why I want to make a toast to all of us, to this kingdom that I am happy to be back in, and to see you here, bigger than when I left, stronger than I expected, and more powerful than the gods could have predicted. This is Artika," Jon exclaimed, as the crowd also shouted along with their king, proud of the kingdom and proud of those who fought in the south, especially those who died, while their bodies would be delivered to the gods with a ritual by the children of the forest in the coming days. The celebration continued for the rest of the night. Aragorn was also near Jon, in the middle of the arena with his wives and sister, and, at one point, Jon carried a tired and unconscious Arya back to the castle, leaving the arena, and the people continuing to party until dawn, something especially common among the dwarves. Jon placed Arya in a separate room and went to his room with his wives to continue what they had paused. The next day, he yawned as he awoke to a dragon's roar outside. "Can you get this dragon to stop roaring so early?" Ygritte murmured with a tone of dissatisfaction, her eyes still closed, while Serena just smiled with her lips closed. Jon sighed and got out of bed, putting on some clothes, and went to his window, opening it to see Aragon flying over the ship. "You really are quite patient. We will have time for this, but I also need to organize my kingdom," he spoke to the dragon, as today was a day when he would begin reviewing everything about Artika: population, resources, plans. Now, he had animals, sand, books, Valyrian steel, other dragon eggs. All of this would change Artika from this point on, and he was also interested in the movements of his enemies, not those from the south, but those to the north. Then Jon got dressed and prepared to start his day as king of this land, after nearly 8 moons away. It was still early morning, while Jon was already in an important meeting in the Senate, having been discussing with all his ministers for a few hours about his next plans for Artika. "So we have no activities from our enemies to the north," Jon commented, looking at the pile of reports. "The dead haven't made any major moves other than bringing a few hundred men to kill tribes and add them to their army." Duncan, clad in his armor as the commander of Artika's army, said with a firm tone. "All right, but we have a large group of free folk gathering." Jon spoke while looking at other reports. "Yes, my king. Our scouts left the wall a few fights ago to investigate the situation and found Mance's camp, the men who all outside the walls of Artika claim to be the king beyond the walls." Brynden said. "What nonsense." Thor scoffed. "Anyway, we'll deal with them if they try to harm us," Jon declared as the others nodded. Mance seemed to be gathering a group of more than 100,000 warriors, but Jon did not see him as a threat when his army was full of equipment and resources, believing that the Artikans could destroy any army in the world. "Even so, I don't want anyone in Artika to be harmed by a group, so I want them watched and their movements monitored," Jon advised while the ministers nodded in agreement. Jon turned back to Thor, who stood looking at him with a serious tone. "How are we doing with the sand we brought from the tournament?" Jon asked. "We're working with it in the furnaces and starting to manufacture glass, as you requested," Thor replied. Jon nodded, listening. "I want a new batch of glass for my personal stock. How are the new structures I requested? I saw that they are ready externally," Jon said, and the dwarf nodded. "The king's greenhouse and the king's furnace are ready for use. We managed to build them in half a year. They're just as you laid out in the project," he said. "That's great. I'll be looking at it as soon as I leave here," Jon spoke with a satisfied tone. "How is the sacred grove?" Jon asked Seraphine, Minister of Magic and Arcane Affairs as wargs. "We are doing very well, spending most of the day playing in the sacred groves and taking care of our children," she spoke with a satisfied tone. "We also help here and there, always teaching about our gods to children who come every day to hear about them in the sacred grove, and we receive many people too." Jon nodded to that. His gaze fell straight on the Minister of Justice and Law, Kira. "How are activities in the city? Is the project for a guard working perfectly?" Jon asked. Kira nodded. "We have 3,000 men coming out of army training, patrolling the city, and we are executing according to our code of laws." Jon heard this and nodded. "How is the crime rate?" Jon asked her. "We've had some problems with fights, murders, and rape with some new members who joined in these last moons," Kira said. Jon knew that even Artika could not avoid some cases of infiltration. After all, they're people. Fights can happen, especially with dwarves, but Jon would never take lightly any crime involving taking someone's life and rape, especially for the people who are constantly entering the walls. After all, they still believe they are living as in the tribes. "We are going to impose severe punishments. Our people need nothing that leads them to such actions. For rapes, we will castrate them and put them to forced labor or expel them from Artika. For murders, there is no choice but the death penalty," Jon warned while the others nodded with his reasoning. "We have a few hundred prisoners of war caught in Reach, a high-ranking noble and a spy from Dorne," disguised as a bard, put all of them to work in the mines and gravel today. Jon said. He still gave some not-so-bad conditions. They would have a house outside the city, a bed, and food, with Artican guards watching them to ensure they don't do any foolishness. It will be done, my king, Keir responded. Jon looked at Gavrin this time, the Minister of Finance and Treasury. How are we doing in gold coins? He asked as the man broke into a smug smile. We are doing very well. Our miners really know how to quickly extract the gold with the tunnels created by the dwarves. We have more than 20 million gold coins, my king, he said as Jon nodded, doubting that any other house in Westeros would have more money. But this was just something extracted from their lands. Soon, they would be doing a lot of trade, since Essos was still their next commercial point. And you, my minister? How are things? Jon asked the giant, Heron, Minister of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Stocks full to trade it for your next trip? Artican King, he said with his characteristic tone for his size, as Jon nodded. Now that we are here, we should talk a little about the south of the wall. Jon began to speak as all the men there paid full attention to him. Even those who had not yet spoken were waiting to see the final decisions with Westeros. As I said, sand, horses, iron, steel, books, and teachers were essential resources that we needed at this time, and we got them with this trip. But in the end, we entered a battle against Westeros, and they bled for it. I don't think they will do nothing about it, but I believe that after seeing us destroy nearly 400 of their ships, they understood that we are not an easy force to mess with, and they feared us for it. I even believe they sought peace after a failed retaliation attempt. After all, no army from the south will survive in the north, Jon said. Why squander resources in this way then? These men from the south of the wall think? Gavrin asked, bewildered. Because they are too proud. Duncan responded, knowing the people of the north, but also knowing that to the south of the neck, they are even worse. All of Westeros is waiting for a response from the king. If he does not launch an attack, they will see that the king's position is weakened. Jon replied with a firm tone, without smiling. But it was the hateful ones who sought this. Ever since we arrived in Westeros, we have been thrown into schemes. That's why. He finally would give the verdict he had already decided. We will no longer trade with the Reach, since they canceled all our supply of horses and animals, Jon said. After all, he had seen the meetings of the nobles, which was not a great surprise after everything that happened. After we spent the other of our coffers with them, my king, Junley, the Minister of Commerce, exclaimed with some dissatisfaction and anger towards those Southerners. There is nothing to be done. I already knew this would happen as soon as we decided to give them an answer in Old Town, but that doesn't mean we won't charge them in the future, Jon said with a somber tone as the others nodded. If their king would campaign south in search of justice for trade, he would certainly succeed and take everything that belongs to him. However, Jon began to speak again. I want Darius to go back to Dorne. I warned Prince Doran. We will send Artikans, and if they were harmed, we will attack Dorne as our enemy, Jon said. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, Darius nodded. I want you to leave with us from Artika and go straight to Dorne, while we are visiting the cities on the west coast of Essos, Jon said, and the minister nodded. They continued talking more about their plans. Westeros was no longer a trading partner for Jon. While he even planned to create trade with the west, the Vale of Arryn, and the north itself, but after the battle, things would not be so easily resolved. Dorne would still be his trading partner as long as they continued to fulfill Jon's orders. Now that we are done with the trade agenda, let's go to what interests me most after I return home. Jon turned his gaze to other last ministers, Aemon and Brynden, who were responsible for the academy, citizenship, and information north of the wall. Are our educators from Dorne adapting well to the city? Jon asked while Aemon nodded, being responsible for the accommodations of everyone. Everyone arrived enchanted with the city, my king. Aemon opened a happy smile as he continued. And they're no less excited about their current life. They're living in lots built near the university and library and started teaching 2 moons ago, teaching children, and all are progressing very well. Your goal of creating an educated nation is really functional, my king. But we still have some problems. Some teachers do not have our quality of teaching or the one you seek for the kingdom, he said, and Jon nodded. Put them with the classes of teachers I've trained over the last few years. Have them achieve excellence and reward them too. I want you and Seraphine to meet Archmaester Marwyn. He might be useful for the city, and place him in the best position you deem," Jon said and turned back to Brynden. "Now we have hundreds of thousands of books. I want you to transcribe laws that we can make Artika use the library efficiently now that we have books, and pass it to the Senate for approval so that Keira can execute it." Jon spoke as the structure of Artika functioned. Ministers and even representatives of the Senate, who were chosen by the population to occupy each of the limited seats, wrote laws. They were placed on agendas while being approved or not. Jon had sovereign power over all this, being able to choose to interfere or not, but he preferred to leave it as is, for the king of Artika not to have so much power, preventing a tyrant from appearing in the future. Jon was also working on other things, but would only reveal them after his first children were born. Brynden nodded. "That will be done. Will you begin your plan about the judiciaries, my king?" He suddenly asked as Jon shook his head. "Not yet. First, I want to do a few things. Then we will implement that. But I want a batch of competent judges that will take a few years to emerge. So I need to work on a few more points about Artican ethics." Jon was developing something important, which would be used to create domes where there would be trials with qualified judges to resolve crimes in Artika more fairly, and not needing Keira to judge everything personally. The population might be above 100,000 people, but it will pass a million in a few decades, so a more solid structure is needed for the city to function. They continued discussing countless subjects. Men, giant, dwarf, and a child of the forest continued talking about Artika. This dome, formed of a king and 10 ministers, was something similar to what Jon saw in King's Landing, but with a strong difference. Here they seriously talked about the future of the kingdom. There was no personal interest, no exchange of favors or pride, anger, or envy. Everyone just had the goal of making Artika be what it was born to be. After that, Jon was alone as he dismissed everyone. Unlike the king of Westeros, he worked entirely for the growth of Artika and to keep it prosperous. He picked up an interesting paper where Brynden had put the population of Artika. Dwarves, 27,000, 13,000 children. There was a growth of 3,000 children since he left. Humans, 193,500, 95,000 children. There was a growth of 10,000 free folk entering the kingdom and 15,000 children since he left. Giants, 7,600, 2.5 thousand children. There was a growth of 200 free giants entering the kingdom and a growth of 500 children since he left. Children of the forest, 700, 650 children. There was a growth of 200 children since he left. Direwolves, 1,200. There was a growth of 200 pups since he left. Normal wolves, 5,600. There was a growth of 1,100 pups since he left. Bears, 1,500. There was a growth of 100 cubs since he left. Shadow cats, 1,420. There was a growth of 120 cubs since he left. Mammoths, 510. There was a growth of 10 calves since he left. Birds, 10,000. Horses, 3,740. Jon brought more than 3,000 horses from the Reach, and there were 140 foals since he left. Military power, army currently composed of dwarfs, 8,000. Humans, 35,000, 1,800 wargs, all have birds and are mounted on shadow cats or bears. Giants, 3,150. Kingdom's resources / military / commercial. Ships, 600, 400 carracks, and 200 galleons. Dragonglass arrows, 8 million. There was a note saying about the growth of all the data from all the numbers since Jon left. Feeling satisfied with the growth of the kingdom, dwarves had not grown beyond the more than 7,000 dwarf women giving birth to 3,000 new babies. After all, there were no dwarves outside of Artika to join them. The same could be said of the children of the forest, who only reproduced. There were no more beyond the wall to join, but their growth was much greater in some years than the last thousands of years, stopping the race from being extinct and giving hope to them. But for the others, like the humans who were easily found in the north, there was an increase of 10,000. Although there were some issues that his Minister of Justice and Law had to deal with, the majority of the free folk entered Artika with good intentions, and Jon could not fail to save them. as this was the will of his gods. The giants had an increase of 200, which might not seem like much, but considering that the race is also nearly extinct, it was good to find 200 new ones coming to Artika on their own. They were also beginning to increase their population with marriages starting to occur. There were other data like the literacy rate of the population, iron, and military equipment, but Jon did not need that now. However, the addition of 400 more ships was something very good. After all, Jon saw the number of ships now in the harbor when he arrived, with the dwarves working severely to increase the fleet at the naval construction bases on the canal side. Jon would still have a fleet of thousands of ships, with his unlimited capacity to create trees more powerful than ironwood. Setting that aside, he decided to go out. After all, he had to organize the batches of iron brought for the creation of weapons in Elden Metal in the Forge District. He headed out while taking Ghost with some royal guards and left that side of the forest heading to his destination. The first thing he had admitted since he saw it yesterday atop Aragon were the king's greenhouse and the king's furnace, two huge structures just for Jon to work in. These were his own personal workshops, where he would put his projects into practice and construction. One had a large glass ball on the roof to let in sunlight, over 50 meters high and 200 meters wide and long, where he would work on plants and alchemy. The other, 50 by 300 by 300, being larger due to the high temperatures not far from the king's greenhouse. It would house a dragon by the entrance made to the side, since Jon designed it for the creation of Valyrian steel, and he needed Aragon for this. He would try it with him for the first time to see if he would succeed during his current stay. Jon did not go to these places now, expecting to do so in the coming weeks, while his time was spent organizing the resources that came from the south, being tons and tons of iron and steel to start the production of new armors and Artican metal. He returned to his castle and greeted his wives affectionately as they rested, but Jon did not stay long for his furnace in the castle, working through the rest of the night, while also taking his Valyrian steel that he had picked up in Old Town and started to meld it to produce some interesting things. He finally took a bath and went to bed, while the next day, he was reading some things in his chair when Arya entered, with Jon breaking into a smile as soon as she emerged from the doors. "Arya, I was looking for you," Jon said. "Jon, I was going to the arena, but Serena told me you needed to talk to me," she said with a curious look. "Don't talk so loud. I'm trying to sleep." A voice came from the bed, while Ygritte was under the covers. "You seem surprised I called you here. After all, you're turning 12 years old today," Jon said, maintaining a smile. "You remembered," she said, becoming a bit shy. "How could I not remember? I do this every year," Jon said teasingly. "Come, I want to give you something precious," Jon said, starting to rise and moving to the side of the bed where Ygritte was the only one still lying down. Arya followed Jon curiously as she saw him take out a box, opening it to reveal two swords in a large format. "This is—" Her eyes sparkled at the sight of the swords. "Valyrian steel," she murmured. "Yes. I must say it was easier to manipulate than I imagined, so I created two new swords for myself, replacing my old ones. You see the design. Blades like these are produced in ET, with soldiers called samurai wielding them," Jon said, touching the two swords before closing the box. "Wait, you said you're going to replace yours?" she exclaimed, stunned. "And Dark Sister?" she asked. "Well, here. This is your gift." Jon pulled out a second box and placed it in front of Arya as the girl was floored, wondering what could be inside, if it really was what she imagined. Then, with her small, trembling feminine hands, she unlocked the locks and began to open it, with Jon watching everything with a smile. In a closed box, there was another rectangular box with glass on the front. It was the container for a sword, Dark Sister, the sword of one of the heroines Arya most respected, Visenya Targaryen, was inside. "Jon, I'm not dreaming, am I?" she said, trembling and stuttering. "It's your sword now, Arya. Look at the sword. I've engraved some names with magic on it. They can't be removed unless the whole sword is melted, and one of them is yours to indicate that it belongs to you until you pass it on or until your death," Jon said, and she widened her eyes as she read. "Visenya Targaryen, Daemon Targaryen, Brynden Rivers, Jon Artika, and my name, Arya Stark," she murmured in disbelief, as she looked at each name engraved on the sword, having received the greatest gift she could have asked for from anyone. In an extremely beautiful place with various flowers and plants, while the light struck like a ray in the middle of that location, someone approached and went to the middle of it. Jon, wearing simple clothes, looked at his special garden, different from the one in the castle where he could place a vast collection of flowers that would make any Tyrell envious, exclusively for his wives to have a privileged view. Here, things were a bit different. The colors were replaced by not-so-variable tones, and much of the smell was substituted by the toxic odor of some of his plants and flowers. This was the king's greenhouse, inaugurated 2 weeks ago, and he had spent more time here than anywhere else at the moment, occupied with his projects. After all, he had very limited time with the trip to Essos. He was planning potions and medicine, while Seraphine was by his side. "Jon, can you say this will work? I mean, it's kind of hard to believe. Even for you." The child of the forest looked at him with suspicion. "I studied Valyrian steel and even dragon glass to create something like this. Let's see if it works." Jon commented as he reached the middle of the place where there was a tree with many leaves around it with large cocoons at its tip. The strange tree was bathed in more sunlight than any other. Jon approached, and this was his years-long project, which he finally put into practice after much study and applying his knowledge. He created a not-so-perfect portal, but he would improve it from now on as he approached one of the cocoons and opened it, with Seraphine watching with great interest. In the cocoon, it opened as if to show its fruit, but instead of something edible, a red crystal emerged from it. Jon calmly pulled it out without damaging the plant, and the crystal was seen by both with some admiration. But the child of the forest saw the normal crystal and looked at Jon with some suspicion. "You spent 2 weeks energizing the Grand Weirwood for this crystal. Does it really work?" she asked. It was true that Jon had spent 2 weeks using his magic directly on the plant, which needed more of his energy to grow than any other he had ever used in his life. Jon was not shaken by Seraphine's skeptical tone and looked at the crystal attentively as it suddenly shone like a great bonfire, making the child of the forest, who always had an air of seriousness and erudition, become alarmed. "Wait, it worked!" she exclaimed louder than she intended, looking at Jon and his crystal with caution. "Yes." Jon smiled at the light, illuminating everything with a red hue. This was his great project, to create magical crystals through his powers with a special plant, which would become a new transformation for Artika, a magical city with its own light, illuminating the streets and the families that made up this kingdom. "This is amazing, King Jon." Leaf approached at that moment, carrying 2 babies in each arm, her own children whom she had given birth to in the last moons, looking with interest at the crystal, aware of Jon's plan, and being more skeptical about it than Seraphine. "Yes, but it's not perfect at all," Jon had to admit, as the crystal began to lose its brightness and fade completely, as if it were losing its energy and dying. "That's a shame." Seraphine, who was quite excited that Jon's plan had worked, was a little disappointed that the crystal had died. "You don't need to worry about that. It's just a prototype. It doesn't have infinite energy, but I can maintain it. I just have to make it store more energy so it doesn't go out so quickly." Jon spoke, still satisfied that he had made some progress on his project. "If you increase the energy storage, it could stay on much longer, but how will you put energy into it? Or will you be charging the crystals with magic every day?" Leaf asked. "Of course not," Jon replied immediately, still looking at the crystal. "There are 2 ways. Either I try to bring the roots of the Grand Weirwood to the surface to fill the post with crystals, or I genetically modify them and fuse a photosynthesis system, where they will be energized in their batteries by sunlight and illuminate Artika during the night. This will even make it easier for the people of Artika to use these crystals in their homes. That's why I am more confident in using the second method," Jon explained. "You're talking about that complex system that plants use to turn sunlight into food for themselves," Seraphine murmured, stunned, while Leaf also looked at Jon in surprise. "Yes, I'm confident I can do it in a few years," Jon said with a confident tone. "My children will see Artika illuminated when they become aware of themselves, and will always remember the city lit up for the rest of their lives." Jon was confident he could achieve this in 2 or 3 years. If you plan this, then it will surely work, King Jon. Leaf smiled. Yes, Jon, Seraphine said in a more cheerful tone. She called Jon without the title when they were alone, so Jon didn't mind. This is good. I'll work here half of my time in the coming weeks, Jon said as he prepared to leave his garden. Do you want me to prepare the vitamins? Seraphine asked. I would like the children of the forest who learned alchemy with me to do it. After all, I need to put magic in the vitamins for the babies. I want my children to be immune to diseases and any infections in these first years of life, Jon said. He also worked to ensure that his children wouldn't suffer what a newborn baby would normally suffer, and he had to be delicate with the doses to give his children. Therefore, he included the children of the forest and their magic, which filtered perfectly for babies without harming them. It will be done, Jon, Seraphine said, and Jon nodded. I'll be going then. I need to do a few things before returning to the castle, Jon said as he left the place with the children of the forest who worked there, bidding him farewell. He exited through the doors while the royal guards waited for him, with a small crowd waiting to see the king. Since the royal guard were at the door of that structure used particularly by the king, it meant that he was there, as every day Jon had been working. He waved calmly to everyone and followed on Panis, his horse, to a platform, instead of the castle or another place. Should we wait for you at the castle, my king? The royal guard asked, and Jon nodded. Exactly, I'll be out of the city for a few hours, and tell my queens I'll be home for our banquet, Jon said while the men nodded, and Jon proceeded up the platform, which was empty. The place had more than 50 square meters, and it didn't take long for something to appear in the sky of Artika as Aragon began to descend to that location. Jon saw his dragon with the whole nearby crowd as it landed in the place, roaring loudly, echoing throughout the blacksmith's district, while some sounds of things falling were heard with some dwarves cursing Aragon with all their might. Can you stop being so conspicuous? Jon looked at the dragon with a disappointed look while it just snorted smoke from its nose as if it didn't care. This dragon is starting to get rebellious. Maybe it has entered adolescence or something. Jon couldn't help but think as he quickly mounted it, and the dragon took off into the sky, ascending above Artika, surpassing the Grand Weirwood. Jon, looking down, could see the red leaves hiding most of the city center, and he guided Aragon to the southwest and south of Artika, passing through the grass fields with thousands of horses being cared for there and heading to the area of green forests. He followed to a specific forest while Aragon descended to a huge open area due to a rocky formation in it. The dragon landed, its giant weight cracking the ground and knocking down some of the rocks in the place. Jon dismounted while looking at Aragon. I'll be here for a while. If you want to fly around the region, feel free, Jon said. But Aragon, hearing that, simply launched frozen flames below him, creating a bed of ice with frozen spikes growing around him, and Jon just shrugged, seeing his dragon begin to lie down for a nap. Jon descended until he reached the forest, where thousands of lives filled the place, and he saw many wolves approaching him, among them his main wolf, Ghost, with his parents and siblings. It's so good to see you again. Jon had to visit them, especially 4 wolves among the others, Shadow, Black Arrow, Ghost Parents, and Grass Sunday. These 4 wolves were the first he had encountered after finding Caraxes and before going to Icehill Farm. He spent his time for the first time in the wolf forest, while packs and packs of wolves approached him, recognizing him as the Alpha. Jon could easily control all those wolves. He could devastate thousands of men with a command and didn't even need to exert much effort, as his blood was naturally linked to the animal, unlike Aragon. Thus, he spent hours with his animals before asking Ghost to go home, as he wanted to keep him close to his wives, and he asked him to take a red-furred she-wolf with him, one he had mated with during his time in western Westeros, wanting to leave some of his offspring for his children as well. Jon returned to the city atop Aragon, landing at the castle while being greeted by Serena and Ygritte. He gathered Arya, and they went to dine together. Jon entered his room some time later, which was filled with dragon eggs, constantly heated by braziers in the room without disturbing them. Jon woke up the next day and went to his special lava bath, refreshing himself as he could. No one else could do this, as it was something that had satisfied him for over 7 years since he started this practice, doing it every possible day. Returning to the blacksmith's district, he decided to spend his day in the king's forge, organizing the place to start his functions, which were nothing less than studying Valyrian steel. He had only the knowledge, but it was still difficult to create. Aragon arrived a moment later, landing outside and entering through an opening in the building created for him, and looked at Jon, listening to his father's instructions. "I need you to help me transform this common metal into Valyrian steel." Jon began, picking up many ingots and placing them in front of him on molds where they would be melted. "Start burning them," Jon exclaimed, and Aragon launched his enormous hot flames at Jon in front of the metal, causing it to begin to boil easily. Jon's clothes were incinerated at that moment, but it didn't stop him from being fine. As he felt the flames covering him, he picked up a hammer with magical runes around it and began to wait for the ingot to start turning into hot liquid, and it happened easily. Jon began to hammer it, without spreading the molten iron, waiting for it to transform into magical metal. This continued for a while, as Jon constantly hammered. Aragon finally tired and began to falter in his flames, unable to continue after 20 minutes of breathing fire, while Jon appeared naked, hammering the metal as it cooled at that moment. Jon continued while Aragon was his only witness, watching Jon continue to hammer the metal for 10 minutes. But in the end, he sighed, failing, seeing the metal remain common with almost no magic. "It looks like we failed again, buddy, just like all our attempts," Jon concluded, but he didn't seem disappointed. Aragon looked at him and snorted, as if blaming Jon. "Is it my fault? All right, I still don't know the reason. In Valyria, they did it with adult dragons, and they also used a Valyrian steel forge. Maybe that's the secret. I'll have to see," Jon said thoughtfully. Jon saw Aragon look dissatisfied when he mentioned adult dragons. After all, Aragon didn't like to seem weak, but Jon didn't care, as he wasn't an adult dragon after all. "Anyway, let's wait a few days before trying again," Jon said, and Aragon watched him donning a set of clothes kept there for him, as if he had anticipated this result, and began to leave the king's forge. Outside, Jon found a large group of dwarves with Thor. They didn't succeed. One dwarf guessed, looking at another and tossing a bag of gold to the first, indicating they had been betting on his success. "I told you using a dragon was a bad idea," another dwarf commented. "Aragon is essential for this. Just as the Valyrians used their dragons for the creation of their steel, I will use my own dragon," Jon said with a severe tone. Sometimes, the dwarf's antipathy towards dragons was tiresome to hear. The dwarf who had spoken lowered his head in a tone of apology while Thor watched him. "Do you think you'll succeed?" he asked curiously, and Jon nodded. "Yes, although I think I'll need a Valyrian steel forge for this," Jon said. "Wait, my king, you need a Valyrian steel forge to create Valyrian steel?" One of the dwarves looked at Jon, not understanding. "Yes, I plan to enter Valyria," Jon declared, leaving everyone surprised. Knowing the current state of the place, after seeing the magical steel and learning more about it, they even stopped at the entrance to see if Jon had succeeded in making it, as dwarves loved metal, and Valyrian steel enchanted them more than Elder metal. Jon planned to enhance it with the runes placed on the steel he created himself, making the future Valyrian steel armor even lighter. "Thor, come with me," Jon said, entering through another door of the structure, leading to a meeting room where Jon discussed kingdom matters when he wasn't in the Senate with Thor. "I need these projects," he said, taking out a sheet and handing it to the dwarf. The dwarf took the sheet and began to analyze it. "You want a large structure in that unused mountain in the south. Why do you want something so big? Do you want to house what in that mountain? A handful of dragons?" he exclaimed, surprised by the open structures around it, with dozens of meters around the mountain. "Good that you guessed. It saves me time to explain," Jon said, smiling. "You can't be serious." "How?" Thor exclaimed immediately. "I have more than a dozen dragon eggs. I'm sure there were some dwarves helping to carry them from Old Town, so I'm surprised you don't know about them yet," Jon said, almost laughing. 12. "You want to put 12 more dragons in Artika?" he exclaimed, stunned by this information. As a dwarf, he didn't like dragons either, but Jon knew he was obliged to get used to this scenario. 12. I plan to have hundreds of them by the time I die in this world, Thor. Don't underestimate me. Jon taunted while the dwarf almost fainted. Fine, it will be done, he said in a bad mood while Jon nodded. I'm going then. I'll spend the rest of the day at the castle, Jon declared as he left the forge, took his horse with his guards, and returned to the castle. He spent some time with his wives, but his attention turned to the book as soon as they went to sleep, with the pregnancy arriving in less than 7 days. He got out of bed and took the book, asking Aragorn to pick him up as he flew out of the castle after telling the guards he would be out for the rest of the night. He took the book. Serena murmured, "Why does he need to leave here with it? He could read it right here." Ygritte immediately complained from her side of the bed. I know, but Jon has been reluctant to read what was written for moons. Maybe it's something very important he feels, Serena murmured. Jon usually kills White Walkers, is in the midst of giant wolves, rides a dragon, but hesitates to read a book? I refuse to believe my husband is afraid of a few words written on paper. Ygritte said in the end. I know, but if this time is different, I also have a strange feeling about that book. Something will happen by the time the sun rises the next day. Serena murmured with a tone of concern, and Ygritte couldn't disagree with that. Then Jon needs me. Ygritte immediately switched from a rebellious woman to someone concerned about her husband. I doubt you can reach him, Serena mocked. Jon wants to stay away. It's better to let him resolve this. You know he would be here if he wanted to be close. Trust him. He'll know how to handle it alone. Serena said, urging Ygritte to sleep. Ygritte remained silent and nodded in the end, but she couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, thinking about her husband. Jon decided to read at more than 100 meters above the ground in the enormous branches of the Grand Weirwood. Wanting to see what was inside away from anyone so he could read in peace, Aragorn landed, and he dismounted, but the dragon didn't leave him. The tree was so gigantic that Aragorn could sleep in its branches. Jon simply sat on the tip of one of the trunks, feeling the night breeze in Artika as he took the book to read. Diary of High Septon Maynard. Let's see what you hide. Jon murmured as he began to read it at that moment, starting from the beginning until he finished it entirely. While Arctic was in the midst of new steps toward development, the South seemed quite agitated. Westeros was not doing well at all. The events that had until then been discussed by the nobility began to spread among the common folk. More and more people in Westeros were learning about the events in Old Town on one hand and the defeat of the royal fleet and the fall of the king on the other. The terrifying fleet coming from beyond the wall began to bring fear to the hearts of everyone in the Seven Kingdoms. They killed the High Septon. They are against the Seven, exclaimed a Septa in a small village in the Riverlands. They are demons from the north, coming to destroy us, shouted a sailor after witnessing the Artikans in action at a port in one of the Stormland cities. I heard our glorious king was beaten up by Ned Stark's bastard son. Ha ha, yelled a drunkard in the middle of the tavern. Watch your words, fool. Do you want to die hanged? The tavern keeper warned him. In many septons nearby, people began to pray, hoping the war would not reach them, especially by a group that had been unbeatable at sea. Will our lords do nothing against the savages from the north? Someone demanded. Savages? I've heard they live better than most common folk, a woman said. Maybe we should go there. Maybe they'll accept us, another person spoke, more out of desperation for food than reasoning. You're crazy if you think we can just sail through the rough seas like that. Another farmer mocked. Let me tell you a song about the Artican Company, spoke a bard in a town in the Vale of Arryn. Hey, I thought he was going to sing a song speaking ill of them, but he's praising the savages from the north. Call the guards. You're arrested. Wait, I'm just singing a song, the bard tried to argue as he was taken to jail. People speaking ill, and some even seeing the Artican group in a good light, although the latter was quite rare, was spoken throughout Westeros in these weeks. As for the nobility, they were in a different situation, regardless of what they thought. Letters circulated among all houses, declaring the Artikans as enemies of the Seven Kingdoms until further notice, while a call to arms had begun among all houses. We certainly won't send any soldiers, Doran commented as he looked at the letter. He might have been offended by Jon's letter when he refused his offer, but he couldn't deny it was satisfying to hear that the fat man sitting on the Iron Throne got beaten up badly after a great defeat at sea. "Are we staying neutral?" his son asked. "Yes. We should worry about the coast. The Iron Men might become bold since 2 huge fleets in Westeros were destroyed a few weeks ago," he said eventually as everyone nodded. His gaze fell on Naira, who seemed to avert her gaze, hiding something. Something Dorne already knew, but did not interfere due to this being his best card. At Storm's End, Renly arrived after returning from Old Town, slightly shaken by what Jon Arctic, the man who had calmly talked with him a short time ago at Highgarden, had led his men to a massacre and takeover of one of Westeros' most important cities. "What should we do, Prince Renly?" a man in the service of House Baratheon asked. "Do we have a choice? My brother wants a force for the north, so let's send at least 3,000 men," he ordered. After all, sending a larger force was suicide with his resources. This also seemed to happen in other realms. While Jon Arryn sent a letter to his kingdom seeking a troop of this number to go to the Wall to meet with others. The Tullys did the same, while Hoster Tully issued this order to his vassals. "Father, let me lead them. I will bring my niece back, and end that damned bastard," Edmund Tully exclaimed. "Don't be a fool. Didn't you hear how they killed hundreds of men on our coast? Do you really think you can face them?" The Blackfish, Brynden Tully, said, mocking his foolish nephew. But Edmund tried to argue, but was once again interrupted, now by his father. "You won't be going north. Edmund, stop this delusion. Do you really think we can face them on their land? The king just wants to sacrifice a group of men, so he doesn't appear as weak as he was in the battle when the stag fell," he said, referring to the battle between Jon Arctic and Robert Baratheon, known as the Fall of the Stag. Elsewhere, Littlefinger was meeting with a man from Essos. "I want you to send as many mercenaries as possible to infiltrate the kingdom. I want all the information possible," Baelish murmured, his gaze rising above the houses. After all, he feared being attacked again. "All right, with the gold you are paying, I can hire some mercenary groups, Lord Baelish, and that scar won't look good on you." The man spoke mockingly. Baelish's face bore a large wound, with Jon's bird attacking him while he hid. Luckily, he had a dagger and managed to kill the bird before dying himself, but it left a significant mark, branding him forever. His hatred for the Starks was already great, whether for Brandon Stark, the one who marked him in his youth, Eddard Stark, who married Catelyn Tully, or Jon Arctic. A new level of hatred was reached while he thought of nothing but revenge, filled with a feeling of regret, knowing that his discovered actions were also reasons for his attempted assassination, while he developed such a trauma that he was constantly looking at the sky, watching for any attack that would come for him. In the north, the atmosphere was also not very good. "Ned, my father will send 3,000 men to the north after your criminal bastard. Are you just going to stand there?" she demanded of her husband in the Solar. "We will not send any of our men beyond the Wall, Catelyn. It's suicide to think they can fight Jon after everything that's happened, especially in his territory." Ned exclaimed. He was not at all eager to sacrifice 3,000 Northerners as the king was asking, and the other realms were doing exactly that. "You will be the only one not sending troops. You're trying to protect him, aren't you? Even disobeying your king," she exclaimed. "Don't forget Arya is with Jon. If Jon is in danger, Arya is in danger too," Ned shouted furiously. "Now, leave me alone. I have to pass the king's orders to the Night's Watch," he said in the end as his wife stormed out of his Solar furiously. Ned watched her slam the door while his gaze fell to the window, sighing over the confusion Jon had thrown the kingdom into, although part of him believed that his nephew would not have done what he did in Old Town without a good reason. Although the North nodded to the king's order, everyone knew it was certain death to send people beyond the Wall. They had strange feelings about Jon. One, that the boy had kidnapped Arya Stark, but the stories that came from the south regarding the girl and how she had become a smart warrior had captivated everyone except his wife, who was against it regardless of how Arya had changed. While Ned pondered the realm and Catelyn went to the Sept to pray in an attempt to calm her fury, Sansa was talking with her friends, stunned by the events. "Sansa, your bastard brother attacked the king. One of her friends in Winterfell murmured in horror. So he really became a king. Jenny Poole murmured at that. Jon is known as the king beyond the wall, a wild type. He will never be a true king, Sansa said firmly. But he defeated the king. Jenny continued. It's because the king is very old now. My father always said how he fought at the Battle of the Trident and defeated Rhaegar Targaryen. Maybe it's time for him to pass the crown to the prince, and I will be the queen. She spoke in a dreamy tone while her friends looked on with a bit of envy. The bastard has become a criminal, Theon said with a malicious tone. Don't talk like that about Jon, Bran exclaimed, advancing with his wooden sword on Theon, who, even with a dislocated arm, could still easily handle a much younger boy. Bran fell to the ground in the next moment. Come on, young Stark, can't I speak of that bastard anymore? He said mockingly. Jon is not a criminal, Bran exclaimed angrily. Stop it. Robb's voice was heard as he approached, while Theon raised an eyebrow at him. What now? You're defending him. You of all people, Theon asked. I'm not defending him, but I don't like you hitting my brother to relieve your frustrations, Robb said sternly. Tisk, doesn't seem like a few years ago you made a brother be expelled from Winterfell along with your mother, Theon taunted angrily at Robb. Robb trembled a bit before continuing. He is not my brother, and you can leave us. I will take over training with Bran, Robb said. Jon is our brother, Bran exclaimed as Theon left in a bad mood, and Robb looked at his brother sternly. He is not, and I don't want you talking about a criminal anymore, Robb said seriously while Bran had to swallow his frustrations before fighting. At least with Robb, it was easier for the boy. As Theon went to a brothel in the town to try to relieve his frustrations, on an island, there was a huge castle with a vast hall with the symbol of the Kraken in the chair there, known as the Salt Chair, and used to be used by the ancient kings of the Ironborns. Balon Greyjoy was listening to reports from the continent. Ha 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 ha. He laughed, satisfied. It seems those whores from the continent are in a pretty bad situation. Maybe this is our time to act. Balon murmured in front of his men, brother, and daughter. Shall we attack them? Victarion Greyjoy, his brother, asked. It's still early. We haven't recovered from the war. But let's prepare. Soon we will launch an attack that will devastate the entire continent, and they will recognize us as sovereigns, Balon said. Should we pull Theon from the Starks first? Asha asked. Theon? That thing was raised by wolves. He's not a kraken. Balon growled, not caring about his son. I foresee a victory over Westeros. The kraken will place its tentacles over the great houses. Aaron, another brother of Balon and a priest to the drowned god, exclaimed while the majority nodded to him, believing in his words. Let's prepare. In a few years, Westeros will feel the kraken. Balon exclaimed. So my father decided to send 3,000 men to the wall. Tyrion was drinking wine in front of Kevin Solar in Lannisport while he nodded. That will be interesting. How many men will freeze their balls off until they meet this mysterious Arctic? He made this question as a joke. I don't know, but just let's call these men. Kevin just shrugged and obeyed his brother's order to summon 3,000 men to die. Grandma, in Highgarden, Willis approached Olenna calmly. Tell me, my grandson. She gave him a small smile. Is this right? Becoming enemies with Arctic is the best path. He asked cautiously. HM, where did that come from? Olenna looked at her grandson. You have to look at the situation on a larger scale. Don't be as foolish as your father. She started, but Willis was not convinced. But you saw how they destroyed the fleets. He said, but Olenna interrupted him. What do you think will happen if we do nothing? They launched an attack in Old Town, your mother's home, desecrated the Citadel, which has a history of thousands of years without anyone coming close to what Jon Arctic did. If we don't attack them, our own vassals will attack us. They demand an answer, my grandson, and we will give them exactly that, Olenna spoke. Willis said nothing, just kept thinking about Olenna's words. He agreed with her and had already had that reasoning. But he also did not want to see giants marching towards Highgarden in the future. Jon Arctic was dangerous, and he did not want to infuriate him to the point of him starting a war with Westeros. You can leave me alone now. This old woman needs to get some air, Olenna murmured while Willis nodded, leaving his grandmother alone with her thoughts. Olenna was pondering the problems while her son was organizing a company of 5,000 men, a number greater than other kingdoms to show off, which Olenna thought was foolish. After all, there were 5,000 dead men. You certainly know how to bring trouble, even though I think you didn't act without reason. Now we are enemies, and I have to think of a way to use your Targaryen bastardy against Arctic. Although he has already gone to war with Westeros, and speaking to the king would make the North ally with Arctic or even become a realm, which is horrible and the worst scenario possible. So I will have to hide this information for now, son of Rhaegar, she murmured in the end. Visenya Targaryen. That is the name Prince Rhaegar chose for his son, while his pregnant wife insists the baby will be a boy, and she is torn between Daeron, Jaehaerys, or Aegon. Jon's words left his mouth with the wind. As he read the book atop the grand weirwood, the sun began to rise that day, casting the first rays between the mountains, while Arctic began to be illuminated. They often had brief disagreements over this. Rhaegar and Lyanna usually don't stay mad at each other for long. Like newlyweds, they seem to love each other. I've been here more than a moon now. Watching Lyanna Targaryen's pregnancy, she looks like she will have a healthy baby. So I might return to King's Landing soon, hoping to crown Rhaegar as king the next time I meet him. The madness of his father is going beyond limits, and thanks to his stupidity, a rebellion has begun while many kingdoms are gathering armies. Rhaegar will spend more time with his wife before he goes to King's Landing to start handling the war with his allies. Jon continued reading the book. There were more parts, but the story between Rhaegar and Lyanna probably ended there, and Jon looked lost in it. He closed the book and looked. He reached this part after reading the entire book, looking for why it bothered him so much. This was proof that Lyanna and Rhaegar were married, not that the Prince Targaryen kidnapped and raped her as was told. They loved each other, and she married him after the High Septa of the time, who must have died in the sack of King's Landing, annulled Rhaegar's marriage to Elia. Jon felt dizzy. The trunk where he was sitting disappeared as he tried to understand what was happening there. A baby that would be born from Lyanna Stark. One that she insisted was a boy, his connection with the Targaryens like Aemon, Brynden, and even Naira Sand, his sister. Jon quickly connected the dots, and although he had suspicions before, he somewhat avoided this path. After all, he didn't want to understand that his life was another lie before he became. A warm and cold feeling came from his past. He was lost and angry at everything at that moment, while he crushed the book in his hands. His father, no, his uncle, had lied to him his entire life and made him live a crappy life until his 8. Name days, just thinking about it. Jon was enraged. He wasn't a bastard as he thought. He was a Targaryen. Jon was so enraged that his eyes shone with intense light. And Aragorn, sitting nearby, quickly sensed his father's unrestrained fury. He raised his head, roaring loudly. All of Arctic heard his roar. That morning, as everyone starting their day on the streets of Arctic immediately looked toward the great tree, where Jon and Aragorn were. Why is he enraged? Arya shouted from the royal castle, not understanding, while Serena and Ygritte looked out the window immediately with concern. However, it was not limited to just Aragorn, as several roars started throughout the kingdom, beginning with Ghost, who went out to the castle courtyard, raising his head and howling loudly, drawing everyone's attention there. His partner did the same, while she was still lying in bed about to give birth. Another howl came from 3 other wolves that Jon brought to the castle. Even Arya's 2 wolves also howled, and the whole city was like that. The people of Arctic didn't understand what was happening as howls from wolves and growls from other animals began to be heard throughout Arctic, and even beyond, while in the forest the animals were all agitated, with many running out growling. This began to instill fear among the citizens, even though no one was being attacked. It wasn't normal behavior, and even the warg's animals were affected, unable to contain their beasts. Jon was still enraged and didn't even understand what was happening around him, thinking only of going to Winterfell at this moment to confront his uncle. He didn't notice when Aragorn seemed to shine at that moment, as a cold wind began to swirl around Jon and his dragon. It started with a cold wind, turning the very air into snow particles, and this continued, exploding as people saw a frosty explosion burst from that place by the Grand Weirwood. This formed a snowstorm as a White Walker would create while it circled Jon and Aragorn, showing their teeth, while growling and still shining. What is happening there? Where did this come from? What is happening with the Grand Weirwood? Someone call the children of the forest? These exclamations began throughout Arctic as the animals continued growling, with even people who had not left their homes going to see, their eyes shining with fear as the snow circulated that part of the great tree, while it began to fall over the city with flakes. Jon was in the middle of that storm, but he didn't seem to care or even know what was happening there, as his gaze continued on the book in front of him. Even covered in snow, he continued consumed by anger. "Who are you?" An ancient and powerful voice, one he hadn't heard for years, resonated in his mind, as if it had come from the tree he was on. "Who am I?" Jon murmured, hearing this. "Are you a Snow, a Stark, a Targaryen?" The voice continued as Jon finally began to reason again. "I am." He didn't take long to find an answer. After all, if he had an existential crisis, all he had to do was look forward to find his answer. However, his vision was obscured by the snowstorm as he finally realized what was happening, while Aragon continued to emit a glow behind him, generating the snowstorm. "I am Jon Arctic," Jon said firmly as the wind with snow continued blowing his hair and clothes while snow accumulated around him. The storm finally began to calm down at this moment after his words, while Aragon returned to normal at this moment, and Arctic finally was seen, as everyone could see the snow particles beginning to disappear too, with the animals also stopping making sounds throughout the region, while looking cautiously and confused about what happened. "Jon Arctic, this is me now," Jon murmured, looking at the city he built, although he was surprised by what just happened and angry about what he discovered. He stood up at that moment, and Aragon, understanding what his father wanted, lowered his neck while Jon mounted him. He then jumped from the Grand Weirwood. Aragon gave a roar before opening his wings right after passing close to the city, while many were frightened by the strange behavior of the dragon, with Jon on top. "Jon," Serena murmured from the castle, looking at Jon, beginning to take attitude. "Where is he going? What was all this?" Ygritte exclaimed, stunned. Serena just looked worried, unable to answer Ygritte's questions, while watching Jon heading in a direction out of Arctic. Aragon's wings continued to beat as he gained a bit more altitude. Jon knew very well who he was at this moment, but that didn't stop him from feeling anger for everything they lied about, and he was heading south with Aragon, toward the wall and beyond. "Raccoon here. Did you find Aragon's abilities too exaggerated?"